Morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. If you're intending to attend the 18th Annual Conflict Resolution Conference, you are in the right place.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lance Youngblood. I'm the MC for this conference again this year. And we have Michelle Noyes is on. She's the sponsor and puts this conference on every year and does a great job with that. And we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Hey, listen, while we're waiting to get started, I want to read this poem. I want to show you this poem. Can everybody see that? Can everybody see that poem?
Yeah, it looks great.
By this little guy named Jacob. Listen to this. This is called Peace and Harmony by Jacob. This is his little peace heart. I am a seed spreading across the world, filling the world with peace and harmony, leaves-shaped hearts making everyone feel happiness. Isn't that something that would be from the heart of a child? I just love that and hope that we can hold on to that and not lose it as we get older. All right, are we ready to get started? Are we close? We're 7 minutes away. That didn't take long. I was instructed to tell jokes as we get warmed up here, but I don't really have any jokes. Two mediators walk into a bar. I don't that's not really a joke. Oh, Cheryl, that's awesome. We just want to remind everybody quickly, please stay muted unless you're speaking or asking a question during the question and answer time. We're going to have a couple of speakers, and then we're going to have at noon, we're going to have breakout sessions. You'll have your choice of 4 different topics that you can go to at our noon session, or you can go into a session with Morgan Duffy Treganza. She's the president of the MAC, and that'll be a great time to answer, to ask questions and get more information about joining the Mediation Association of Colorado. Got several comments on this on this poem. Cheryl made this comment that students are 25% of our population and 100% of our future. Isn't that true? That's really good. And then to close out the day, we've got our keynote speaker, and then I believe there'll be question and answer sessions throughout at the end of every session that we do. So we're so grateful for everybody coming. Just on behalf of Phoenix Strategies, we appreciate everyone's attendance at the conference. I see some familiar. This is my 4th year to MC this conference, and I don't even know. I'll tell you, I had a chance in 2019. I told this story this weekend. I had a chance to I was in one quote career for about 30 years, and I had an opportunity, as one person described it, to reimagine myself. And I made my way to mediation through, much like probably you guys did, through the 40-hour class at Phoenix Strategies or whatever. There's a number of outlets for that. And one of the objectives for me was to get to know the other folks in the mediation community. And now I find myself 4 years later emceeing this conference again. And so I am grateful. I'm grateful that I had the career that I had, but I'm also grateful that I could find my way to something that really fed my heart. So I appreciate everybody. And I appreciate all the opportunities. Are we ready to get started, Michelle? Thumbs up. All right. I'm going to introduce, I believe let me get oriented here. I'm going to introduce Morgan Duffy Tregenza from the MAC, and she's going to say a few words about her program. Morgan,
Hi,
are you there?
I am. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
We can hear
Okay,
you.
great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lance, for the kind introduction, and likewise, I'm very happy to be here this morning. My name is Morgan Tregenza. I'm the president of the Mediation Association of Colorado. We are a professional organization of mediation professionals, and you can become a member in varying levels, and I'll go into that at more detail at the lunchtime hour. And I am an attorney turned mediator, but I ardently believe in this process and I'm a big proponent of it. The MAC is a wonderful community of mediators and mediation organizations. We come together on a bunch of different fronts and have a bunch of different committees. We have a legislative committee that's active on legislative matters as it relates to mediation, community mediation organization committees. We're launching some mediation in the digital age committees. So a lot of activity as it relates to the mediation world. But really our focus is to be a community of the Colorado members of mediation, both as professional members, people who are interested in the profession on varying levels, whether or not you're interested in becoming a mediator, using mediation in some way in your business, or using mediation as actually a process. And we are continuing to grow and we are continuing to explore ways to offer benefits to our members. We're excited to be offering a few new professional benefits soon. But my Zoom room is always open, so feel free to reach out to me individually. And I'm always happy to help connect people to other mediators, other board members who might be of assistance as you are in your mediation journey, either tenured or new to the profession. Please reach out, and I'll share my email in the chat if that works, Lance.
That sounds great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Yeah, really good. So welcome. Thank you, Morgan, for that. That was outstanding. And Kristen, do you want to say a few words about Conflict Resolution Month? There she is.
I just had to
All
navigate
right.
a few things there. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I help lead a group called Conflict Resolution Month in Colorado. We're a dynamic group of folks from all over the place, from attorneys to, academia, students, I already said attorneys, librarians, conflict resolution practitioners. We have just all sorts of folks that are in our group, and we advocate for conflict resolution. This month, October, is Conflict Resolution Month in Colorado. We just got done passing out our legislative packets, which include our book, Listen Like You Mean It, which you'll hear lots about today, to our state reps and our state senators and our lieutenant governor and governor. And we are just really lucky to have so much amazing programming this year. So we have 2 sessions left. We have a book discussion on the 24th, and we have a Listen Like You Mean It listening workshop on the 22nd. Message me if you're interested in attending. Both of those are actually via Zoom. Our in-person sessions have all concluded for the year. So yeah, happy to be here. And if you're interested at all in what we do, there's lots of us on this call that's amazing. But feel free to private message me or public message me, whatever. Happy to share information.
Great, Kristen. Thank you. That was outstanding, and we appreciate your sponsorship. I am going to talk now about just 1 second here. I want to talk about my company, Conflict Solutions of Southern Colorado. I am proposing kind of what I think is a different model for mediation services. If you're a large law firm and practicing and you have a mediation practice, I want to propose, or I want to talk to you about outsourced or contract mediation services. Think contract paralegal services, where you go and contract with a small paralegal firm for just a one-off or a temporary situation. Think about that through using mediation services, contract or outsourced mediation services in the same way. It could really help you cut costs. It can actually add a new revenue stream. So take down my number and give me a call. I'd love to visit with any of the law firms out there about using Conflict Solutions for contract mediation services. So appreciate that. I'm going to stop. Did I stop sharing? Did I ever share? Okay, great. Okay, so now we have, I want to introduce Suzanne Vandermeer. She's going to talk to us today about intellectual agility. This presentation highlights intellectual wellness for both mediators and parties engaged in mediation. Suzanne Vandermeer is dedicated to practicing creative, cognitive, and physical agility in all areas of life. Suzanne, she is a freelance visual thinking facilitator and an APPA certified philosophical counselor. She hosts a monthly philosophy cafe. I want to turn it over to Suzanne now. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Lance, and welcome everyone to this conference. Good morning. And some of you may also know that I am the program manager for the Office of Dispute Resolutions mediation program. So that is my really busy day job. Let me see if I can share my presentation.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm just going to try what happens if I do it in full screen. If I can get there, one moment.
You're doing fine. You just advanced a slide. You're doing fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just see this screen with face. So let's do it this way. So before we talk about cognitive agility, I'd just like to do it. And what I'd like to ask everyone is to unmute and follow with a little exercise, little warm up with me. So it will be an A, B, C, D. Just shout out a word with an A, then a B, C, D, and then we'll reverse. So I'll start with an A, active.
Apple.
B.
Apple boy.
Animated.
Bees, more bees.
Ball.
Buoyancy.
Brown.
Beloved.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Bravo.
Rain.
Victor.
Ooh,
Better.
Better.
Balance.
Benign.
Brave. Book.
Bright.
Right. Okay, bright. Let's go C.
Careful. Cooperate. Communicate.
Character.
Couch.
Conflict.
Collaborate.
Challenge.
Caring.
Consider.
Community.
Cheerful.
Casual.
Crisis.
Curiosity.
Conflict.
Chaos.
Cautious. Ooh,
Cognitive.
Let's go. Cognitive. Let's go D. Dog.
Dynamic.
Daring. Delegate. Dependent.
Disagree.
Dynamic.
Doodle.
Delicious.
Dormant.
Direct.
Dialogue.
Different.
Distant.
Driven.
Beautiful. And now let's turn it around. C. Back to C. Try to come up with new ones. Creative.
Choice.
Conscious.
Congratulate.
Congregate.
Crazy.
Curious.
Constant.
And back to clumsy. I like that one. B.
Broken.
Betrothed.
Found.
Breakfast.
Bargain.
Brilliant.
Bargain.
There.
And back to A to wrap it up.
Arduous.
Awesome.
Aligned.
Amazing.
Alphabet.
Articulate.
Aha.
Allocate.
Approach.
Allocate.
Ooh,
All
thank you.
together.
Alpha.
Thank you all. Thank you all for articulating and for playing along right away. So what I mean with cognitive agility is, first of all, flexibility in thinking. And there, as we've seen, there's a certain pace in it. It is a thinking on your feet, kind of quickly. But with that quickly, I also want to already, and that's as much reminding myself as others, like that doesn't mean we're scattered or rushed or too fast. Cognitive agility is also agility to take the pause. And if you don't have anything to contribute, then you pause and you listen. So it's that agility to move in a variety of paces as well. So let's zoom in on mediation. Like a common experience in mediation, it's by nature part of the process, but that parties get stuck, and that the intention of the mediation is to get them moving, and that your role has a lot to do with how to get them moving and how to help them to get unstuck. So where I'd like to start is what that stuck place sounds like. And I came up with a few, and then I'd like to hear from a few of you what it sounds like for you in your mediation practice. And not everyone is in a mediation practice. So I would say broaden it up to any type of conflict resolution process or practice that you have. So for parties, sounds like, no way, can't trust him. We already tried that. I'd rather go to court. And what does it sound like for you? What do parties let you know when they're stuck? And I can't really see hands. So I'd like to invite you to, if you feel called to speak, speak, and kind of tune in if you speak over each other.
I'll speak, Suzanne.
Thank you.
I hear the parties aren't trusting of the process, and probably I need to build rapport with them and letting them know what will happen and what I believe the opportunity is. And I always think that when I hear those types of pushback or language, it's a great opportunity for me to really invite them to trust in the process and understand it and get them to be on board. I personally, I really enjoy when people say that, because it's a great opportunity to talk about what mediation is and the benefits, and to have them buy into why they're going to participate and why they should do so meaningfully. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Morgan. So not just stuck with the other party, but stuck with the process, like in a sense of, I first need to trust to move, to come along, to join in. Anyone else, like how do you know they're stuck? What do you hear?
They're focused on their past investment. I've already spent so much. I can't accept anything less. I've already spent so much time. I've already invested so much energy. It has to do with all their past investment, whether it's time, relationships, money, building something, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is like also in a cognitive sense, like it's one of the biases that humans have strongly. It's loss aversion, right? And thinking you've invested the best, and that is whatever you invested is the most effective, and to let go of that
or the
it's really
assumption
hard.
that you're going to lose it.
Yeah,
there's this assumption that's hard to talk them out of, that they're going to lose everything if they make a bargain, if they negotiate, if they open up.
Yeah, and the stuck is also what I'm hearing. It's stuck in the past. It's stuck in investment and stuck in fear of loss and in the past.
Yes.
Okay, to switch to the mediator side, because this is as much about supporting the parties as supporting ourselves in being agile in our role. This party just needs counseling, like basically the voice you have in your head, right? You're listening to them, and where do you get stuck? This is totally irrelevant. How will I get this wrapped up in the next whatever time left? And Michelle, can I invite you to share a little bit what this sounds like for you in your practice?
Oh, sticking points for mediators. So yeah, I think when I come across a situation where people are very stuck in, they can't see another viewpoint. And so my mind automatically goes to, oh, they must have narcissistic tendencies, and that's their problem. Why they can't bend, or why they can't see the other person's perspective. And so that is, for me, I have to kind of get out of that mindset. Or if I really truly believe that, what's going to work besides my typical empathetic way of going about things?
Yeah, so and the stuck point there is, the stuck place is, I know what their problem is, right? This is their problem. And that then like limits you're saying, oh, they're not taking perspective, but actually that ties you in like, it becomes more difficult to take perspective and to see perspective. Someone else, like, what does it sound for you in your head when do you feel really stuck?
I haven't gone deep enough.
Can you say that again? They haven't gone deep.
I haven't gone deep enough. I haven't put all the questions to them to be able to consider, and that it's, my position to get into where they're at, it's just maybe not connecting. So that's how, when I'm like, oh, this is not, why is it not, gelling? Why aren't they starting to get the communication going? What can I do to get me out of it, to help them start flowing in the process?
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. And that is like, it's more like, oh, you take the stuck out on yourself a little bit. What I'm hearing is like, I didn't do enough. I didn't say the right thing. Like, what can I do? And the what can I do, I think, is an effective question, but the stuck can come when it's like, ooh, I didn't do it right, or I didn't do it enough, didn't do enough in some way. Yeah.
I was
Thank
going to
you.
add something, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
And maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but I was in a situation where we were already in a caucus, and it was a mom-daughter deal. And the challenge for me was that mom was completely convinced that I was taking daughter's side. You know what I mean? It's trying to get past that part. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking, okay, the time constraints and everything, but I had to make sure that I could build, you know, that rapport and have her feel like, no, I'm completely here, you know, as a neutral, you know, as a neutral party. But I couldn't get past that. I couldn't quite. So it's hard for that good faith, you know, participation in a mediation to take place when you just she was just not trusting me. It was really hard. I didn't know what else to try to say, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, and Marissa, that is a really good point, that it's also not always linear, right? You think you're moving, and now what I hear, there is not a trusting in the process, like similar to where some people said, oh, I need to first trust the process. And so she expressed she didn't trust you as a neutral. It's even like more, right? She didn't trust you as a neutral. That's even different than the process. So it's also easier there to get triggered ourselves, to get stuck ourselves, because now it's on us, right? Now it's on us. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you for bringing that to life, like to real life. So I'll move on to the next. This is kind of, I would say, it's not untrue, but I think it's where a lot of the focus can be in mediation, and even in current conversations about mediation, that there is a lot of focus on emotional, trauma-informed, social emotional, the nature of conflict. So we easily go in the assumption or the accusation, they're emotionally stuck, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're sad, and therefore they don't have the bandwidth, willingness, trust, all of those things to engage. So if we look at it through that lens, we'll probably try to accommodate in that realm. And I'm not discounting any of that dimension, but I'd like to, in this session, to bring in another dimension. And so for the theme of this conference, it's the journey of wellness. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with this model. I'm going to show two. One has 6 dimensions, and the next one is 8. But in these realms of wellness, intellectual wellness is important. And that, again, is for the mediator and for the parties. And you could say, oh, in times of crisis or conflict or difficulty or big change, that are typically part of the time when parties are involved in mediation, their intellectual wellness is equally important, but could also equally be compressed and challenged. And so here's the next. I just wanted to show that there's different ways to define these dimensions. Then added dimensions here are financial wellness and vocational wellness or professional wellness. So this was just to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to, like I said, zoom in on intellectual wellness today. So why is it important? Oh, I have one question. I don't have the bandwidth to look at the chat. So Michelle, would you be willing to monitor the chat? And if there's questions, feel free to interrupt, because I think they're more relevant in the moment than at the end. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. And it's also okay to, and like I said, I can't see everyone's hand, so I need some help in
Sure.
facilitating.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can help
we
with
can
that
do
too.
Okay, thank you. That's so why is it important? First of all, it's to the core of the philosophy of mediation mediation is a process of self-determination by the parties, facilitated, supported by a mediator. And in order to do that, you have to have critical thinking on board. You have to have analytical thinking on board. You have to have critical thinking on board. You have to have those conversations about process. You have to have conversations about ground rules, process rules, explaining a concept like confidentiality, and that means you're not going to subpoena me. That is all in that realm. And then, of course, critical thinking in what are my needs? What are my interests? Where do I have capacity to compromise or to come up with solutions? And that is the next part, creative thinking. In order to get unstuck and to move, there has to be an opening of thinking, an opening of seeing other possibilities, seeing other viewpoints. And a part of that takes creative thinking. The third, oh, I am skipping here. Yes. Third reason why it's important is that the cognitive capacity, whether that's in the moment or in general, can be a factor of equity and power dynamics between parties. And you might see that specifically in, let's say, small claims mediation, where there's by nature, let's say, credit debt collection, right? There is a professional side and there is a non-professional side. In domestic relations, yeah, you might have one partner who's just has more cognitive power or more whatever professional language that can then play a role in this ability to fully participate and to self-determine. And finally, it can be cognitive agility is situational, like we all know. Like for me, an example is if I'm stressed or I'm not kind of comfortable in the situation, my English gets impaired. This is my second language. So I start to have more difficulty pronouncing and finding the right word. And when I'm safe and comfortable and centered and in a good space, then that's a lot easier. So it can be impacted situationally, temporarily, or longer term for whatever reason, brain injury, trauma. So all those elements, all those diversities and specifics that parties bring to the table are in that dimension of intellectual wellness. And then really important for people that do this as in a professional role as mediators, especially attorney mediators, the ABA model standards of conduct for mediators, the quality of process section talks about specifically this responsibility for the mediator. And I'm going to read it. It's really long, but if a party appears to have difficulty comprehending the process, issues, or settlement options, or difficulty participating in the mediation, the mediator should explore the circumstances and potential accommodations, modifications, or adjustments that would make possible the party's capacity to comprehend, participate, and exercise self-determination. So it's right on your plate here. And it's huge. When I read this, it's like just thinking about this, imagining how much is in this, it's nearly impossible, I would say, to do that in the moment. But that also brings in that huge demand for your cognitive agility as a mediator. And we had a conversation with the ODR mediators, Lunch and Learn, partially about this topic earlier this week. And just when you start to pull that apart, it takes lots of intuition, but also lots of strategies and tools to meet this standard. So that's why
I have a question real quick.
Yes, go ahead.
First, I probably should know, but what is the ABA?
The American Bar Association.
Oh, okay, the Bar Association. And so you're saying that I have had a couple of situations where I determined that parties were not able to self-determine, but I just called it off. Are you saying that what you're saying, you're offering another option, saying maybe there are things that could be done to empower them so that they could self-determine or they could understand cognitively what was going on?
Yes, and I would
I
say
do.
I would see that as a spectrum, like, yeah, on the far end, and there is that word capacity, which ultimately has at least a legal meaning as well, but I'm not going to say if this has only a legal meaning here or more of an intentional meaning or a more intuitive meaning, broader meaning. But I would say the end of the spectrum is you have assessed they're not capable to participate and self-determinate. And then you come to the conclusion, whatever, it's not appropriate for mediation. But before you come to that, this is the range where it's like, yeah, there's a dance. Like you go figure it out, you go sense, and then you go see. And some you might do automatically, almost unconsciously. Some you might do quietly in your head. You might slow down. You might check more often for understanding. You might repeat more, but some you might put on the table, like, hey, I wonder, let's say you have a sense there might be a literacy issue, right? Like, ooh, I wonder, is everyone like okay to read these documents here? And then
Yeah,
I
I've had that
just,
situation too.
yeah,
where
just
I-
one example that a mediator brought up in a meeting earlier this week was like, oh, I had someone who couldn't read, and there was someone in the hallway, was an in-person mediation, who would help read them if needed. So they were brought in and out. So that's an example of an accommodation. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And Suzanne, I might
Yes.
just pop in and say,
Yeah.
we've had a couple comments in the chat.
Yeah.
So the first one is from Linda Newell saying a trauma-informed approach is so important. And the second one is from Jay Goldberg saying this was absolutely true in a mediation I was a part of last night. We're seeing more of this as we mediate more affordable housing conflicts involving formerly homeless individuals with trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is very, it's a really good point that trauma, like, yes, it is an emotional dimension, but it impacts people in their functioning across the board, including cognitive function. And I'm not going to neuroscience and the I don't have the best language for that, but it's sort of, yes, absolutely. Trauma informed means that you are aware that impacts their functioning across the board, including cognitive, and to be aware and to adapt for that. Yeah. And also, like, it's a little bit of a side note, but it's like, oh, that means there is a high demand for regulating. And in some theories, they say, oh, there needs to be a regulating other. As the mediator, you are that regulating other. And that means, first of all, you need to be really regulated yourself in terms of your nervous system, but also, sorry, in your own cognitive space. Like maybe that means slowing down in how you speak, or repeating some concepts, or suggesting how we're going to take notes, all those things. Like you then become really their cognitive scaffolding in the process, even before you can work on content.
And Suzanne, just a follow-up question we have here, and you just shared taking notes and some of those pieces. But other options that you have used to support folks struggling with competency?
Yeah.
And I would say we could put that out to the group to get ideas on how to, I think that would be really good if you could put those ideas in the chat, because, you know, using an interpreter or a translation tool of some sort can help people with competency would be the first idea that I.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Michelle. Let's see what people can share in the chat, and then we'll touch on a few of those. Yeah, support person.
I really like this one that somebody just typed in. Have the individuals themselves help you determine what they need, what would best serve them, just by asking them. I really like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and another one might be to bring in flexibility in your time. Let's say, do we need to take a break? Like how long can we go? For some people, like a 40-minute session is okay, or 60 or 2 hours. But for some people, that might be in chunks of 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and then say, okay, let's say take really regular breaks, or maybe we need to reschedule and do this in multiple short sessions. And Cheryl brings in children, yeah.
So you can keep putting your suggestions in the chat and Suzanne can continue on.
Okay, good, thank you. I'll put the chat on my screen. So with going back to that responsibility and like self-check and tuning into the parties, like how do we know what the cognitive agility is, cognitive bandwidth in that situation for ourselves and the parties we're working with? And this is not a extensive, like complete list, but these are the elements that when I thought of this came to mind as really big pieces. So first of all, it's expressed in attitude, being open-minded and having the ability to see, understand different perspectives and to switch, like to step in someone else's shoes and then step back in your own shoes, that there is a flexibility there. And a willingness, because when people would be really stressed, really super stressed, they're not willing, not capable to do that. They're like in survival mode themselves and they have a limited perspective. The second one is a structured process. Can someone follow process steps and recognize them as process steps and stay with them within a relevant conceptual framework? And the very simple one that they came up with is like, oh, when we say a traffic light and we think of the colors red, yellow, green, and we would identify them as stop, pause, go, can someone follow that pattern that I'm now introducing here? And again, when you're really super stuck either in an emotion or stress or worry or not trusting, that's probably already going over your head. So it's a like very simple model. And then let's say a more complicated one, like, oh, you're mediating parties in to arrive at a parenting plan. The court form then gives a structure with questions, and it could mean like, oh, they want to talk about traveling or vacation or holidays, and then it's like, no, we're not there yet. Let's stay here. And are people able and willing, showing that they can do that dance? Okay, we're not there yet. We'll get there. I get what we're doing here. We have a process. We have steps. And you could say these are indicators when something happens there, when someone continually brings up the holidays. You could say, okay, they're not with me in this structured process that I want to do that as topic 5. So then you assess, like, okay, maybe we should do it first. If that's really the obstacle to be more present, more agile, then okay, let's do it. And maybe you decide to talk about that and say, hey, how are we going to resolve this? Or maybe that means, oh, you have someone who really has difficulty to follow any kind of structure. But I think you can see how people handle it. Then the third one, I would say, is really the core. That is thinking moves. And you could also think about that as that's meta thinking, meta cognition. We're reflecting about thinking. And so it's, can the parties be guided to pause, to park something, to add something, to switch a topic, to zoom in and out, to think short-term, long-term. Perspective taking is also a thinking move. And can you do it yourself, right? Like, can you say, ooh, we're getting so stuck in details here. Oops, I'm catching that. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to step back. And the fourth one is, oops. You're a little hiding under the pictures here. Okay. Evaluate and decide. So this is the most analytical piece. So now is someone able to compare and contrast statements based on relevant combinations of facts, logical arguments, criteria, interests. This is really where there's a lot in the mix, there's a puzzle, and are people able to evaluate and decide there? And I think that's where you'll see a lot of, even cognitive capacity things is in that realm. If you feel like they cannot understand the criteria and match that to a situation. I need to move this differently. So now, what are some strategies during mediation? And the first one is how you start the session. Of course, you do a lot of acknowledging of the process and the situation and what they bring, but then in some way bring a name that this is a cognitive space. And you wouldn't have to say it in those words, but name some of the tools that parties will be using, like, oh, we'll make lists of potential solutions. We'll have to evaluate how they work for you with your situation. What is better? What would we be better? What are your concerns? We might need to make an agenda, and it means we might not be able to talk about everything. We might need to park something. So you start to kind of prime them for, we'll have to do some thinking together. And Michelle, can I ask you to share a little bit how you do that in your sessions?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about ahead of time was how I get people to start thinking openly. And I'm sure a lot of you do this in your own practice, but even in intake, before mediation even takes place, I set the idea that, yes, you have an idea on how this should be resolved. The other party probably has an idea on how they think this should be resolved, but there is something out there that hasn't been created yet that hasn't been created. So be open to some new ideas and just really priming people to help them be more agile when they get to mediation, that there are new possibilities that haven't been discussed.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And then the second one is, as the conversation unfolds, like, check for understanding and listen for difficulties and capacity in assessing the situation when parties share their stories. So that's really that both active and intuitive tuning in to this cognitive space for the parties. And the third one is to introduce a method of brainstorming solutions and kind of how will we make decisions. So it's basically you introduce the meta conversation, the how conversation, how will we resolve who, what, when, where. And Michelle, can you also say how you introduce that part?
So yeah, and if you've taken the 40-hour basic course from me before, then this is a repeat. But one of the things that we list are the issues and the interests, and in a matrix. And so one of the things that I point out and really help people understand, and again, this is going a little bit deeper than just the issue that they come to resolve. It is helping them understanding what are the underneath interests, the need, fears, concerns, desires, the motives or the motivations that they're choosing to resolve things in a certain way. I let them know that all of the interests need to be satisfied in a good agreement, so that everyone feels heard, everyone knows what their underlying story that they haven't revealed is, and that everybody walks away feeling good about the agreement. So it's just really helping them understand what's underneath. And then another way that if you're in a group setting, in a facilitation, the how sometimes is consensus. They have to come up with, that in order to get through a new policy or a new system, there has to be some sort of consensus. And some people will get what they want and some people won't get what they want. And I feel like that's sort of like kindergarten. Some days we get what we want, and some people we don't. So
Thank you. Yes. And those are really like, that is then the framework where you start, you do the groundwork, the framing of, before you jump in that space of looking into interests and outcomes and solutions. So, yes, and I would like to ask to put some of you in the chat how you introduce some of those frameworks in your session. And the second one, but let's do them one at a time, otherwise they're hard to capture. So, like, how do you do the groundwork for a thinking framework? And I can speak while people are doing that a little bit to what Michelle said about, building consensus. A model that I've seen introduced is like, thumbs up if it's a yes for you, thumbs down if it's a no, and thumbs to the side if you can live with it. And that is a cognitive model that you then introduce. There's an option in between, yes or no. There isn't, okay, I can live with this. And Kristen says, I start with collaborative norming, shared expectations, and accountability. Silent reflection. Yeah.
I'll tell you, I did, it's not in the chat, but I do this in a little bit less formal way. I always say, kind of at the beginning, I say something like this typically. I don't do it every time, but have you thought about what you'd like to have happen today? Don't tell me, but just have you thought about it? If you haven't, that's fine. That helps me understand that I can help you. We'll need to start there, helping you figure out. But that usually gets them thinking, there will be an outcome. I mean, that we are going to get past whatever I'm thinking about right now, how angry I am at Bill. We're going to get, he's already, and that kind of moves them forward a little bit. And it also lays the groundwork for, if I do have to think, how did you decide that's what the price of the car is now? He goes, how will I know what price I should settle on? How did you decide what the price you think it is now? And then there are all kinds of creative ways you could think about how a car might be priced, or what you need to feel safe, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think it's great, like you said, it's not as formal, but it's definitely, you open the cognitive space by asking that, like how you ask that. And you also say, it gives you, when they say, no, I haven't thought about it, then you say, that's fine. But it gives you information about where they're at in their process.
Yes, it would be shocking how many times I go into a mediation. They haven't thought about what they want. They're still focused on what they're angry about.
Yeah, and it's like that would be a surprise, right? But it means like, that's where you have to start. Like, Yes, they're emotions,
Right.
and we also have to do thinking work together here. We have to go
Yes, thinking work.
figure it out. Yeah.
Yes.
And I have two things that I'd like to on the chat. Jay Goldberg, I don't know your first name, but I see you check for capacity in preparation meetings.
Oh.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you do that.
Jessica, are you out there?
Yeah, we're here. We're tuning in from the Fort Collins Mediation Program.
Thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Would you say again your question, Suzanne?
Yes, I see in the chat that you said, oh, I check for capacity in preparation meetings. And I'm curious what that sounds like. Could you just like do a few sentences of that conversation, how you check in?
Oh, yeah. So we just in phone conversations or Zoom conversations with parties before the mediation, we ask very open-ended questions to let them choose how to answer and tell us what they need to feel ready, to share ideas that they're going to bring to the session. And then we also give them a worksheet to complete if they want to. It's optional.
Okay, thank you. And then I see Kim shared, I'm going to read it instead of top-down decision making, giving the parties the confidence that they have the ability to make decisions together. So there will be a win-win outcome. I really like that. It's like, oh, and that's a meta process, right? It's like, oh, if decision making is the content, the thing we're doing is how we're doing it, is we have to have confidence in our ability. So there's an empowering into participating in that cognitive space. Yeah. And to make decisions, to affirm their ability to self-determine. And you also bring in, oh, there will be and a win-win outcome.
Carrie, I don't know that story.
Developed.
You have someone
And it
who
was
is not muted. So
Hi, somebody's not muted.
yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to move on just in the spirit of time. So cognitive strategies during mediation. A big piece, of course, of the nature of conflict resolution and mediation is people come in from different worlds, and to participate, there needs to be some agility in viewpoint. So I'll give a few examples here of methods of bringing in that flexibility. And some of you may be familiar with the concept of 7th generation thinking, which my understanding is a practice with an indigenous roots or heritage. And the idea is that if you make a decision to envision the impact on up to the 7th generation of that, what the impact will be 7 generations later of that decision. So it shows a really long time horizon. It also shows a lot of caring for future generations. And I thought about it, it's like, oh, how to make that practical. And I talked a little bit about this with Michelle as well. Like, oh, if in mediation, you would only even think about the 2nd generation or 3rd generation when you talk about sibling relationships or family dynamics. Like, what would it be like for your grandchildren when they know all their parents, or they know all their siblings? Or what would it be like for your siblings later, or for your children later when they have to care for aging parents? How important is their relationship? So take them outside of the current generation. And that also brings an agility in time horizon. Is this important now, short term, long term? Can we make that specific? Like, what is this like next year? How do you envision this when your children go to high school? Another agility and viewpoint, more on the person viewpoint, is what would you recommend to your best friend? And it could be when someone says, I don't know, I just don't know, or something like a real stuck expression, maybe take them out of themselves and stepping a little bit in someone else. What would you recommend, or what would you think would be relevant if you would talk about this with your best friend? And then a more philosophical one that comes from the political philosophy is John Rawls' veil of ignorance. And that's a thought experiment where we imagine ourselves sitting behind a veil of ignorance. And with that ignorance, we don't know who we are. We don't identify with our personal circumstances. Let's say our race, our social economic position, our financials. And for example, now I don't know if I'm rich or poor or somewhere in between, if I have am a citizen or an undocumented person, and now I have to decide about raising taxes. Like, how does that change? What is then the impact on people that I'm thinking about? And this is a big abstract one, but you could bring in agility in mediation when you would say, okay, when can you take one element, let's say they're really attached to, I can't come up with an example right now, but you really feel there's a stuckness about one element of them, like, I can pay this, I can afford this, I can never afford that, or like, I can't fly, I can drive, like something specific about their circumstances, and then just try to say, okay, just let's park that for a moment. Like, what if money would not be on the table? What would you feel would be right for your children, or would be right to move forward? Michelle, would you like to add anything to this to make it like really specific, concrete for a mediation session?
I don't have an example for the veil of ignorance. I do like, though, putting things in a time reference. Again, that's helping people get outside the now and help them see what may happen or walk them down that path. Yeah, and so the last one, as far as reframing, our child cannot stay overnight at dad's house when dad's girlfriend's there. So just reframing it in a way that is not accusatory, that is always helpful to people, to help them focus on the problem, not the person. And, it sounds like you both want boundaries for your children when new partners are introduced into a relationship or something like that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And reframing is there. And of course, that is one of the core pieces that you're trained in and that you're doing already a lot. And so I just wanted to point out that is, of course, a cognitive strategy that is really essential in mediation and things. Thank you, Michelle.
And I was wondering, I saw in the chat, I'm wondering if Tanya, if you would like to expand on your comment.
Okay.
That sounds interesting.
A micro roles in, I like that.
I would love to. Suzanne, thank you so much for talking about John Rawls. So a lot of the work that we do in policy development comes from, I would argue, that behind that veil of ignorance, that idea of, I don't know where I'm at, I don't know if I'm rich, I don't know if I'm poor. And so Rawls would have argued that the best policy decisions would be those that are made from behind, that benefit those who are the least advantaged among us. And it's the only way we protect ourselves, because we don't know if that's us or not. So I love the idea of using it in a mediation where you can introduce this idea. And I haven't tried this. It just popped in my head, where, you can get people to say, you don't know who you are. You don't know if you've won. You don't know if you've lost. You don't know if you have the advantage here. You don't know if you don't. And really get them to think hard about, okay, in in a world that's fair and equitable, what would be the right decision? So just kind of go through that mental process of, it's not about me winning, it's about finding a resolution and coming to peace in a way that we can both live. And I love the idea. So now, thanks a lot. You gave me more work to do. I'm going to go and try and put together some material about how can we use Rawlsian ethics in mediation. So that was just such a brilliant idea. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. And I would love to see how that evolved. I would love to see that. So that
If I come up with something useful, I'm happy to share it with you.
okay, I would love to see that. Very cool. Yeah. So now a little bit about a toolbox. Two elements of a toolbox that I'd like to introduce here. One is totally not new, obvious, but one is new, I think, for most of you. It is a method developed by the Harvard Education Project, Project Zero. And the method is called Making Thinking Visible. And I love the title, and I understood it initially as Making Thinking Visual, which is another passion of mine. But it's really their method's not super visual. But so I would take it as visible as explicit, making thinking explicit. So it's really having meta conversations, learning conversations. This whole method is developed for education, I think up to high school, but I always think this is something that is great for adults in many, many settings as well. So I just like to, in the next part of, I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. And the links in the PDF will be shared there. The link is here, but it's also hot linked in one of the images. And then the second tool that you probably already use actively or intuitively are metaphors. And one that I'd like to just share here is, the expression, we need to get on the same page. Let's get on the same page. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Well, when I'm in a conflict, I don't want to be on the same page. No way, not your page. So then if you start to feel resistance when you say something like that, we need to all come together. It's like, is that true? Is that good? What if we don't want to be on the same page? And then the agility would be, how about 2 chapters in the same book? Could that work? The family book could be 2 different pages and 1 shared page. And when you say the same boat, you don't want to be in the same boat. Of course you don't want to be in the same boat, but maybe you are okay with having the kids in the same boat. So it is really playing with words, but seeing the impact that has and being attuned to what lands with people, and also listening for metaphors, because people might start to say, we're just spinning our wheels, whatever, and then say, okay, tell me more about that. Like, what would you like to do instead? How would this move differently, to stay with their metaphors? Moving on. So in this part, I'd like to try a few things with you. So the thinking tools have introduced a part, and that connects really to Tanya's comment about the roles and micro roles. If in my thought experiment is, a lot of mediation, conversation, problem solving is about their problem, their immediate situation. Like, let's resolve parenting time and how we're going to do the holidays. That's about their holidays. That's about their stories. What happens if you, as a mediator, first, or for a part of it, engage parties in a more neutral thinking routine that is not related to their situation? That's what Tanya did, like, let's take it outside of your family, but what is a fair outcome in general? And then you could maybe work your way towards that. And very, very, I'm going to show you. I'm going to just show it with an exercise. The core thinking routine here is how the Project Zero's toolbox looks like. So there's this whole bunch of thinking categories. For example, perspective taking, introducing and exploring ideas, generating possibilities and analogies. And every of these colors you see here, perspective taking has this then next layer of lots of exercise, and then every exercise has an instruction and a guide for that exercise. And some are more children oriented, so you might need to adapt them, and some are really universal. The one that I'd like to practice here is one of their core thinking routines, and it is, I used to think, now I think. For example, I used to think dogs are scary, dangerous. Now I think they're really sweet. What happened? Well, lots of things happened. But then if you say what, maybe you got new information about dogs, you got a new experience, it is showing like, oh, people can change, and things, information or experience can change how we think. So what I'd like you to do, just take a few minutes for yourself to come up with an example, something like you used to think and now you think. And then when you have something, then think about what happened for this to change. What was the switch? Okay, and what I suggest, like that is in sync with my thought experiment, like what if you take parties to a neutral space? This is something when you feel you can get stuck with parties, could either start with or throw in the mix and say, okay, like let's like take a pause here. Have you changed your mind on things sometimes? In general, about the earth is flat and now it's round. So in the spirit of time, I'll ask you to come back and pause this thinking exercise for yourself now. So the next one from the section of perspective taking is one that's called compass point. And they bring in the metaphor or image of a compass with, of course, the directions. And then for east, they say, oh, what's exciting about this idea? For W, what's worrisome, what you worry about this idea? What do you need to know? And south is, what is your stance or suggestion for moving forward? And Michelle, can I invite you, when I introduced this to you, what your response was like how you would or would not use this in mediation?
Yeah, so I think when you're in the evaluation of options towards, you're getting people towards, making final decisions, and people are wavering on their decisions or how to go forward, this could be something that you could keep, in your notes or something, WNES, just to, as a reference, as a mediator, to go through some of these questions to help parties evaluate what their options are. If people are saying, no, I don't like this. And, so, the question could be, what is worrisome, or what is causing you worry? Or what else do you need to know? What could help you move forward? And just kind of going through this, is there any part of this that excites you? Or asking the other party, what excites you about this? And just to kind of help walk them through. I think this could be just a good habit to get in with option building, or I'm sorry, evaluation of options.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is like it's not like, oh, you would share the model or the concept or the framework with the parties, but you kind of keep it for your own agility when you start to feel, hey, I need to move. And yeah, in the moment, I have this tool for me. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, and then we had set this up as breakout groups, but we've had such a good time already, such good conversations that we won't have the time to do that, but I'd still like to introduce just the exercise for you to take it home. Like I said, metaphors are one of the cognitive strategies, one of the cognitive tools you already use. And Twyla Thorpe, the dancer, choreographer, in her book, The Creative Habit, says mental agility depends on our capacity to recognize and construct metaphor. And then she gives these exercises. She gives many exercises, and I picked one of them. And I'll just introduce the exercise here, and then we'll wrap up. So metaphor is really comparing, right? This A, something abstract, looks like B, something more concrete. Or this A, this boat looks like something that maybe feels better than a boat. Like, oh, I'm afraid of water. I don't want to be in a boat, but it looks like a car. So the exercise that I'm inviting you to is to come up with associative metaphors for abstract ideas that are really common in conflict conversations, like trust. And then as a few examples would be words like a net, an anchor, a tree. And I actually Googled this. There's a metaphor dictionary. I didn't put the link in it. It was a while ago. There were 25 metaphors for trust. And then fair share, the words fair will come up, fair play, fair share, fair outcome, fair. Like, how can you make fair specific? And then once you have that metaphor, let's say piece of the pie, yeah, I want my piece of the pie. Like, okay, what does your piece of the pie look like? What is your piece of the pie? Who else here might want a piece of the pie? Your children, the grandparents, the neighbors, like who else? Next generation. Unrealistic. Is this realistic? Can we do this? Like, can you come up with a metaphor for that? Communication. This was one that Michelle suggested, talking about a bridge. And then problem solving. Like, I often use geographical wayfinding metaphors, roadmap, path, crossroads, things like that. So thank you. I'm at the end of my presentation. I would encourage you, if this presentation spoke to you, to take the metaphor exercise home with you in the car, or formally or informally, but see just how you can add some metaphors to your own repertoire. So we're at the end of our session, and just to complete, I would just like to hear from a few people. What would you like to take home from what you've heard or learned today in one of your upcoming sessions? And if some of you like would want to speak that and go unmute themselves.
Well, I'll speak up. This is Lance, and I'll say that I typically do two kinds of mediation all the time, and it can get into, you can just kind of sink into a rut. And this really caused me to think about being more creative. I do a lot of small claims court, and it's such a time crunch, and every mediation feels like a crisis, because you got to get it done fast, or they got to go to court, or they're trying to make a decision. And most of the time people in small claims court don't really have much awareness or experience of what's getting ready to happen to them. And this really caused me to think a little bit out, expand my thinking on what options could be, what tools I could bring to the table to help them make decisions, and also kind of push it back onto them. I think Michelle's model that she teaches, it really is continually pushing the decision making back onto parties. And I really thought these are some tools to help us do that. So excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. And I also heard you say that to keep it fresh, right? To keep it fun, that it's otherwise it feels
Yes.
like the same crisis or the same crunch. So it's also to
Yes.
keep you fresh, keep us fresh. Yes.
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
And others have said the compass, the metaphor activity. Someone else said the Project Zero resources. So it seems like a lot of folks are taking many of these pieces home with them.
That is wonderful to hear. And I really enjoyed preparing this and thinking about this and bringing this to this group. And I wish you a exciting conference. There's a great program ahead of us. And thank you so much for your time and participation, and all the best in your work.
Thank you,
Suzanne, thank you. We give you a virtual applause. Thank you so much. It was a great job. Your examples were good. Your slides were wonderful and colorful and creative. Listen, we're going to take a break. It's 50. We're going to take actually 16 minutes. We'll come back at 10 o'clock, and we're going to hear from Tyler Keyworth. And we appreciate, again, everybody being here, and we'll talk to you at 10 o'clock. Thanks. Matter to the negotiation, because he wanted everyone to climb to resolution. That's silly. That's goofy. Okay, here we go. I said write a joke about a mediator, and then I said write a joke about mediation. Here's the joke. Why did the mediation session go smoothly? Because they finally realized arguing was just a pointless dispute. Oh, Michelle's laughing. Everybody's kind of giggling about that one. Okay,
I'm laughing at you. Your face.
That's these are how can a machine tell a joke? These are not good jokes. Okay, all right. Hey, listen, it's 1 minute till. It's 1 minute till. Everybody, is everybody back? That session with Suzanne. That was pretty good. I thought she did a great job. Okay, I'm going to now. I see Tyler on the screen. Tyler, I like Kristen, I get to see you once a year. And so and so I want to introduce Tyler. This session is about is this interactive workshop. Participants will dive into the world of addressing negative workplace culture through preventative and responsive conflict management strategies. Tyler, I want to introduce Tyler. He's the Assistant Director of Workplace Engagement and Recruitment at the University of Denver. I'm going to stop there, Tyler, and let you add any to that you want. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate all our attendees being here. Tyler, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lance. Actually, it's also University of Colorado, Denver, not to be confused with
University
of Denver.
of Colorado, Denver. Okay, sorry about that.
It never happens, I swear. I used to work at University of Colorado Boulder, so that was easier because people are like, oh, Boulder, I know that. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name's Tyler, and we'll be talking about all sorts of fun conflict stuff and organizations and all sorts of good things. I'll share my screen and get the presentation up, and don't have that. Okay. So we're going to be talking about workplace culture and conflict practices and kind of the nexus between those two, how those two things fit together, go through some fun scenarios, talk through a model that I like to use in working with folks. So we've got some fun things going on, and we'll try to keep it as interactive as possible because that's much more fun as well. But I'll introduce myself. So I'm Tyler. I started working in the conflict world back in 2008. Yeah, I did an AmeriCorps program in Maryland. And when I graduated from college, I was like, what do I do next? I don't know what happens now. I have this college degree, but that doesn't mean that anyone wants to talk to me. And so I decided to do an AmeriCorps program working in mediation in Maryland, and did that and worked there. Ended up working in like nonprofit conflict resolution for about 6 years. Ended up doing like something like 600 mediations during that time. A lot of like really dense experience, large group, lots of large group facilitation work, starting in restorative justice, things like that. Then me and my wife picked up and moved to Cambodia for a year and spent time in Southeast Asia and did some traveling, had some fun with that. And then when we came back, we were like, well, we don't have to live in Maryland anymore. Where do we want to live? So we decided to, we had always liked Colorado and decided to move here along with everyone else in 2015. And so moved here and have been here since. I worked for 7 years at University of Colorado Boulder, doing restorative justice and conflict resolution for them. And a lot of that was based in work with students, but then as kind of practices started to take hold, other folks in the university started to say, hey, I think we need that, or hey, could you work with this group? And it was a bit of an awkward fit, working with students in a student-related division, then working with faculty and working with staff and stuff like that. And but we ended up doing that as well. And then now I work at University of Colorado Denver, and I work in HR, which is a little bit different spin on things. And so I get to, the cool thing is that any problem, people just contact you and they're like, hey, can you help me? And whereas before I'd have to say what skills I have and how I fit in and all this kind of stuff. Now with HR, they're like, please help me. And I'm like, oh, I also have this whole other skill set. And so that's been an interesting transition from going from people not necessarily realizing how I might be able to help to they're asking for help, and then I'm kind of selling them on more conflict related practices or restorative related practices and stuff like that. So we're going to be talking about that today. Any questions from folks about any of that before we move on? No, just blank stares. Okay, great. That's what we're going for. So the presentation today is called Workplace Culture and Conflict Practices, Managing the Mess is what I came up with when I put it together. So kind of like working in large institutions, things can be kind of a mess and you get to figure it out. And so kind of the thesis I'm kind of bringing to this conversation is that we often as conflict folks get stuck in one practice that we provide when there's a whole range of things in ways that we might be able to help people, and different ways to thinking about working with folks that can expand kind of the possibilities and the ways to potentially transform workplace relationships and conflicts that folks are experiencing. So, first of all, what is an organization? Like, where are these things that people work? Anyone want to give us a non-Googled definition of what an organization might be? What do you think it is? Feel free to put it in the chat or you come off mute. Either one is good. Okay, let's see what we got. A group with a shared goal. Nice. I like that. That's very positive. Shared goal of some sort. What else might an organization be? Humans put together with a common purpose. Awesome. Yeah. Please speak into the mic or closer to it. Okay. My mic is just on my laptop. So, and a group of individuals heading the same directions. Okay, great. Awesome. Is it coming through more clear if I'm a little closer? A bit. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes the computer mic works great. And then sometimes it just decides it doesn't want to listen to me. A group of individuals heading the same direction. Awesome. Yeah, I think I really like all of those definitions. The one I'm going to use for today is a group of people who work together. So that's kind of like this people, they're in the same place. It's a group of people, and working together can have a lot of different meanings of like how they interact. It's also accomplishing potentially some goals together and things like that as well. So kind of like a group of people working together. And we're not going to get a ton into the specificity of what it means to be X organization or Y organization or anything like that, but focus more on the human component of what people are experiencing. So how does conflict show up in an organization? How do you all see, have you experienced conflict? What ways does conflict show up in an organization? So feel free to put it in the chat. You can also come off mute if you'd like to as well. Communication and assumptions, definitely. When people are not aligned on goals or direction, poor morale, gossip, definitely. One-to-one group organizations, we also have like who's involved. Is it one, two people? Is it a lot of people? Is it the whole organization, right? We have systems are outdated, definitely differing opinions on a whole range of stuff. Personality misaligned. I just did a mediation yesterday. Was it 2 days? I can't remember. With two colleagues that did not get along, mostly just based on personality. They just like engage with the world in totally different ways. Negativity, transition or change to an organization, misaligned expectations, misunderstanding, bias, assumptions, lack of acknowledgement, and undermined by coworkers, my way or the highway, which is the way the presentation will be today, just so you know. Disparate treatment of employees, conflict styles, prejudice, bias, or clueless inclusivity. Awesome. So there's a lot there, right? A lot of different things that can cause conflict. So basically, good luck to everyone working in an organization. So I kind of like think about it that one of the challenges is you often have these tensions coming together, right? So you have, supervisor, someone who's responsible for an employee, and they have kind of different goals out of that relationships a lot of times. You have leadership and you have staff, right? You have folks that are responsible for the direction and people responsible for doing the work. You have laws and policy, which are often at odds with what's right for people, right? Just because something is codified in law or in policy doesn't mean it makes sense for what people need or what people want. We also have it's all about productivity, right? Like get your work done, etc. versus maybe more of a human-centered approach. We're like, hey, what do people need? What do people want? And then you also have things like structure, flexibility, and this list could go on and on about the different ways that people could approach work, could engage with work. And that means, just like you all put into the chat, there's just a whole host of ways that people can get into conflict with each other in a lot of different areas, which to me means that you need a lot of different practices and ways of working with folks to be able to resolve it. Because not everything is going to look like a clean mediation where somebody comes to you, hey, I'm having a problem with X person. You call X person, Like, let's get together and have a conversation about it. Everyone's like, let's do it, that kind of thing, versus it's often really messy where you have a supervisor that says, hey, I'm having problems with employee. Is the problem with the supervisor? Is it with the employee? Is it between them? Is it with the organization? So these kinds of things can lead into a lot of different decision making. So why do we care? Why do we care about this as conflict folks? What do you think? Why should we care about conflict in organizations? Feel free to put it in the chat, or as I'll offer again, come off mute if you want to as well.
Well, I would like to say something. I think that especially in an organization, I mean, being able to really focus on that objective, whatever that organization does, if you can't get along, you know what I mean? It just makes a world of difference to be able to work well with your fellow, coworkers.
Yeah, often I felt like the people you work with is far more important than the work you do, right? Because it's going to impact you in just such a different way. You could probably do similar work somewhere else, but if your coworkers, if you can't get along with them, it's going to be a really challenging day-to-day experience. Yeah. Also, retention got put in the chat that can be a huge thing, that if there's conflict in an organization, you just hemorrhage people, right? Because people are like, I'm going to go somewhere else where I don't get treated this way. Just had someone leave this week who took another job somewhere else just because she's like, hey, I don't like what's happening in my unit. This job is about the same somewhere else. Let's try it somewhere else, right? And so these things can have big impacts. Also, the goal can be disrupted. Work is not like Vegas, sadly. Whatever happens at work often spills into family, community life. Absolutely. That you see, I was working with a couple folks in a scenario that will come up later, where it kind of reached ahead, and one of the people was talking to me was like, my husband is telling me if I don't figure this out in the next week, I have to quit my job because it is ruining my life. And you can just have these huge impacts from the way people are experiencing it. People spend a lot of time in organization. If they're in conflict, it affects mental wellness. Absolutely, that just like that experience of work in life can be really affected. And so you have this both. It's going to affect productivity. It's going to affect work. It's going to affect all sorts of things. And we have skills that we can offer folks. So some other ways to think about it would be they've got that sweet, sweet money, right? Like organizations often have money. And as people working in the conflict world, if you have a full-time job somewhere, great. Often people are freelancing, kind of like have their own business, right? That you need places to find people that will pay you for your services, right? So organizations often have money and they need things solved, so they're willing to put some dollars down to help out. So that's always a nice thing for those of us that are trying to survive. And then also leaders might be excellent at leading, like really good at a lot of parts of their job. And they might be challenged in managing conflict, right? Because those two things are not necessarily always congruent. I think a lot of great leaders can do both, but that doesn't mean that someone with a certain skill set can also manage people appropriately, especially when things get sticky. When somebody comes to them like, hey, so-and-so is doing this to me, and it gets really confusing and they're hearing lots of different things. I work with one leader regularly on a weekly basis. We check in, and their instinct around some of these things is just they have some really strong skills, and then also they choose the wrong path at every fork, where it's like they're given an option of which way you want to go, and they often choose the one that they shouldn't go down, right? And so I think that like we have something to offer folks too, that they might need help managing that. And great leaders are not immune to conflict, especially when they're in the middle of it, and it's really hard to be neutral in your own conflicts. There's also they're often the most difficult people to reach with the truth. Absolutely. Yep. I'm working on a situation right now where there's some high up leadership involved, and it's really hard, and I'm working with folks that need certain changes to happen, but getting people to see changes need to happen can be really challenging. So you just have a lot of different pieces with leadership there as well. And then organizations often overemphasize punitive structures while acting passively in conflict. So if you go to your HR department, you're like, hey, what happens if somebody does something wrong at work? They can probably spell out a progressive disciplinary process. They can probably talk about what the consequences might be, but then you often see people take the passive approach, right? They could engage in processes like that, but they're like, that feels harsh, right? And so they don't do anything about all these problems that come up. And then what do you think happens from those? They get worse, right? Because people, it has a compounding snowball effect, because if people don't address problems, then it's a permissive culture, right? And all of a sudden people can treat people poorly and get away with it, right? And then you have this really negative kind of spiral happen. And then also the individual incidents that occur can cause harm in amongst themselves. They do a lot of hard work on the employee handbook and they rarely use it. Absolutely, right? There's like, often you have these things written down on paper that don't really have any meaning for what that means and how we engage, how we treat people. And then we feel responsible for the health and well-being of our community, our work colleagues, our community, and we all serve the larger community where families and friends reside. Absolutely, that we have, like, if you're not well at work, it's gonna not work well, and you spend so much of your time at work, so it's worth putting some effort into it. And yeah, punitive structures dominate as a way to control and manage rather than to get to the root. Takes time and courage to do that. Yeah, often if you have somebody that, you know, speaks inappropriately to someone in a meeting, gets a warning officially from it, right? Go that punitive, it turns out there might be an underlying conflict there. There might be another concern that's happening, and addressing those things with kind of like depth and care can be really important. So there can be a lack of accountability, transparency, and progress that can often be brought into these things when you have this punitive structure that's rarely utilized, and then permissive culture that's happening at the same time. Can we really do conflict in this economy? I don't know, because there's, you know, folks, often we have inflation happening, right, which pushing pressure on people because their dollars are going not as far, and so you have people experiencing that in a really negative way. Also, polarization is really happening a ton at the moment. We have people unwilling to engage in constructive conversation after they've heard the first word out of someone's mouth, right? And that often can cause issues. Turnover, burnout, low morale also can feed into this as well. That when you have this high turnover, people that are still in an organization are often burnt out, and then you have low morale as a whole, it can really feed the whole system and create some really negative dynamics. So yeah, I think that's some reasons why we should care. Okay, so next we're going to talk about one of my favorite conflict theories. So it's from 1994. And it is the nested theory of conflict. And it's something I use all the time to think about how do we decide how to intervene in a conflict. So you have different levels of conflict. So the first level is kind of an issue level. So that would be, let's say Michelle and I are deciding what my presentation today should be about, right? And I say it should be one thing, Michelle says another. That might be an issue level, because it's just about, hey, what are we going to present on, right? There's not anything else. What if then the next level would be relational? Let's say Michelle and I have trouble navigating conversations with each other. We can't figure out how to get along, how to have a productive dynamic, or anytime we kind of things get negative, it can go into a negative place from there pretty quickly because our relational dynamic isn't working. Then we have more organizational. So this could be like, hey, the Phoenix strategies and I don't get along because of some sort of structural relationship there. Maybe our values as an organization and my values don't align or something, right? You could have that happening, or the way people work together doesn't work on a structural level. And then you have more system structural. So this can be broadened out into a lot of different areas, but let's say that that this can be related to different like dynamics across culture and across people. So like the fact that I'm a white man could play into that, right? That isn't necessarily an issue level, isn't necessarily relational or organizational, but could be a system-wide thing of how we engage and how we interact. And that, you know, this year conference, there were too many male speakers or something, so I wouldn't present, right? Something like that, that you can have kind of these system level things that are impacting how we make change. So one way to think about it in terms of that's easier for me to remember is, okay, so in other words, it is employees' relationship to individual issues, each other. So how do they relate to each other? How do they relate to their work team, their unit, And then how do they relate to the larger organization? What are the things that the systems that are at play that are causing different issues? So for example, at some organizations, they pay people that do different types of jobs differently, right? Although that might be an issue about pay, it could also be about an institution structure, right? And then maybe they pay IT people more because they value them more, and they pay people that do human services less because they are like, hey, they're a dime a dozen like we are. And they pay people less, and you have these kind of like structural issues that can cause conflict. And it's not at the issue level, not the relational level, not the work team level, but often more at the like larger structural organization level. Or you have other decisions that can be made or the way people relate to an organization. So I often use this to think about how do we, on what level is this conflict happening? And then given what level it's happening, that involves different interventions. If the conflict is happening on an organizational level, doing things that affect the relationship between people could help, but it's probably not going to get to the root of the problem. Also, doing things at the individual issue level, if it's about that Michelle and I can't get along, addressing the one issue about what I'm talking about today could help, right? It might solve it for a moment, but it doesn't resolve the relational issue that we might have between each other. Does that make sense? What questions, thoughts, comments do folks have on this model generally? Cool. Everyone don't speak at once. Okay, good. Okay, so next, I want to also think about what is important to us as conflict professionals. So what kinds of values are you bringing to your work that you do? And I think that they can operate on different levels as well. So for example, there's 4 things that I often think about when I'm working with folks on how to utilize. So for example, the first one is self-determination, right? That's something that's really important to us as conflict folks. We want to give people spaces to exercise their self-determination. And often this might be the first time they're exercising it in their job, for example, right? If there's somebody that's more of an individual contributor that gets direction from their boss, right? They're just doing it. That often giving space in a kind of like a mediation or something like that can give them the ability to make their own decisions about how they resolve something. And that can be a huge thing. So self-determination can be really important. I think also connection is super important, right? Providing opportunities for folks to connect with each other is something that we often don't do on a daily basis. In working in organizations, we're really good at often just getting to work, doing our thing, right? Hey, how's it going? But not really giving intentional space for connection. And that's something that can really help on that relational level, that if we're not giving space for connection, providing that intentionally can really address that. Then we have accountability. So we talked about this in this kind of permissive, passive culture that often happens, that like I hear time and time again, so-and-so saw something happening, but didn't do anything about it. And often that means bringing in accountability. And that's just not like bringing the hammer necessarily. But that also means, how do we do group expectations together? What do we expect from each other? What does it mean to be, what does it even mean to be on time to work? I don't know. It probably depends on the unit, right? And the people involved. In creating norms and expectations provides clarity and accountability that didn't exist before. If nobody's sure what the answer to that question is, how can you say someone was late to work, right? Because nobody is on the same page. And sometimes these really simple things, or what does it mean to have good communication with each other? Maybe like we want to have good communication. Yeah, we want to talk. Okay, great, good. What does that mean? And getting clarity about what that means so people can hold each other accountable and address issues that as they come up. Because if there's not an established baseline, it's really hard to know when to step in versus when to let something go, because people don't know exactly what's expected of them. And then the last one is around respect. And I think that that's incredibly important. And often in large organizations, folks don't feel respected by the organization that they're participating in because they feel like decisions are made without them in mind, right? So sometimes finding ways, how can you find ways to help people get that respect they're looking for, treat them with respect, ensure respect is happening, is a little bit different twist on some of the conflict stuff, but I think that it can be really powerful in helping people to feel better and have high morale at work by feeling respected by the institution they work for, by their colleagues, by the people where they work with on a daily basis, and for themselves in the work that they do. So I think that can be a really important thing as well. Yeah, these are kind of like 4 things I was trying to think about what kind of guides the work that I do. And you would probably, a lot of them would fall in one of these 4 buckets of self-determination, connection, accountability, and respect. And often when I'm operating with one of these in mind. How do I give self-determination to folks since they don't seem like they have that at the moment? How do we provide accountability so that people feel like they know what to expect from each other? How do we engender respect, and how do we create opportunities for connection? Okay, a lot of talking so far. Questions about that? Okay, so now we get into what do we provide? What tools do we have? So I was just going to open it up first for you all for given all the things I've talked about, what tools do we have as conflict professionals at our disposal to help address these things? What kind of options do we have to bring to the table? Listening, awesome. Empathy and understanding, absolutely. Those are probably, hopefully, if listening is happening, empathy and understanding are happening as well, right? Definitely. What else? What else can we bring to the table? Or the chairs, or the people standing around. What do we have to offer? Humility, objectivity, absolutely. Conversations, consults, listening session, mediation, trauma. It went away. Trauma-informed approaches, absolutely, right? So using some of our processes to our advantage. Setting boundaries. Yeah, you could do some boundary setting with folks. You could create a safe space for people to talk where they might not feel like they've ever had that before. With that mediation I mentioned that I did the other day between the 2 employees that personalities just don't work, right? One of the outcomes of it was that they were not going to have conversations in the future that didn't involve a third person, right? And sure, it would have been great if they were like, oh, I understand you. You're great. Let's move forward and be best of friends at work. Sometimes that's not possible, right? And so they got really clear, hey, we're going to involve a third person. And they set other boundaries about how they're going to work together so they feel safe and productive at work without having to be worried about this coming up for them. And so sometimes it's not all kumbaya, but can be just really practical of what do we need to make sure we feel comfortable. Having collaborative conversation, reflecting back what we hear to ensure clarity, creating safe space for parties to express themselves when there's a power differential, definitely. And you get that a ton in organizations. We have employer-employee, leadership, staff, right? Even somebody is in HR might have power. I don't, but some people might. And then also and employees or leadership, and you have all these different power and hierarchical dynamics that can really be at play. And there's also understanding of the organization chart, roles, responsibilities, expectations. Absolutely. One thing we often do when starting with hiring is asking first for an org chart from the different units. Hey, okay, you want to hire someone here? Can you give us an org chart so we know how they fit in? And people are like, you want what? Like an org chart, just how do they fit into the structure? And even that can create good change because it becomes clear about where people fit and how they relate to each other. And that's not always the case. So we have a lot of different tools at our disposal. So I'm going to give you some more. We also can do conflict coaching, right? I'm sure folks here have done some conflict coaching in the past. We can do mediation. We can do supervisor coaching, large group facilitation, circles. And I'm going to talk
Can you
about.
Say more about supervisor coaching?
Yeah, I'll come back to
what does that look like? Oh, okay. You'll come back to it. Okay.
I'll just read them off real quick. And then group norms, expectations, restorative justice practices, a listening tour, conflict and communication training, feedback modules, structural changes, DEI training, right? There's a lot of kind of options. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but kind of thinking about the things I've done recently with organizations, they fit often in this realm and they have very different focuses. So I'll kind of walk through each one. So conflict coaching is about working with one or more individuals in conflict that are often on one quote unquote side of the conflict, to help them think about how they engage in conflict differently, talk through a specific scenario, give them tools and skills to be able to engage in conflict more constructively. So that's often an individual, and I've also done it in like a group of like 4 or 5 that were all kind of on one side of a conflict, and helping them strategize how they were best going to engage in this. Also mediation, I think people are aware of that one. Then large supervisor coaching. So this is something I do on a daily basis. So this is working with folks that are leaders, supervisors, helping them to work with their folks, their employees or folks they work with in a way that's more constructive and more conflict informed, so to speak, right? So for example, I talk to lots of different leaders here, and they'll be like, hey, I'm having a problem with this person. Here's what's been going on. What do I do about it? Right? So it's almost like a bit of like a conflict coaching mixed with like some of the HR policies, practices as well. So kind of like, hey, okay, so tell me what you're thinking about doing. How do you see that playing out? What might be the process of doing it that way? What might be the drawbacks? What are other strategies you can use? And so kind of like helping to reality test for them and to give them a chance to like examine things from an, as somebody said before, an objective view, right? That like often they're mired in the politics of their unit, right? Their team, their relationship. And when you're really like stuck in that, it's really hard to see the forest through the trees. So sometimes my job is just like providing an objective way that folks can engage differently. And I'm not usually giving advice, but more just like reality checking and asking questions, and building a relationship with them through that as well. So the next time they go to make a decision, they're like, oh, I remember that one, and kind of my decision tree. Let me think through that again, right? And so that's kind of like the coaching that happens there, if that makes sense, Lance. Kind of like working with folks to hopefully make constructive decisions rather than rash or decisions that end up harming folks in some way.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
No problem. We've got large group facilitation. So sometimes it's like, hey, we need to sort out what's happening with X issue. Let's get people together to have a conversation around it. And that could be, 3 or 4 people. It could be, 50, 60 people, depending on the size of what's happening and what people need to discuss. Circles. So typically those are a very preventative conflict practice that I use, but also is a way to build relationship, address issues before they happen, but also can be used as a reactive strategy as well, as folks are able to address things in a very different way. There's also group norms, expectations. So kind of like giving people a chance to like, hey, what do you need from each other as colleagues? What does it mean? Okay, so it sounds like you want to communicate effectively. What does that mean? Sounds like you want people to pull their weight. What does pulling your weight mean? So being that person that can kind of like, instead of just being, oh yeah, pull your weight. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, let's get down to what that means so that everyone knows what's expected when they're working together. And it gives them a framework to use for accountability in the future as well. You could use restorative justice practices as there's different incidents of harm that happen. You could do a listening tour where you're listening to all sorts of different folks in an organization to understand what's happening. Hey, I want to hear from everyone about what's going on. I worked with a team recently that did a big listening tour because it was just really unclear what the problem was. Still kind of unclear, but at least there's some more information that's out there. So sometimes I've seen people utilize that when leadership is trying to get information about what's happening. And so often that's listening, anonymizing it, and then providing it as like more qualitative themes, if that makes sense, rather than, Lance said in our conversation, because then it would feel like you're tattling on what Lance thinks, but rather bringing it to a more objective point of view. Conflict and communication training. So like doing some training for folks to build their skills, in utilizing different feedback modules. Often feedback is just something that's talked about. Yeah, just do feedback, give feedback. what does that mean, right? What does it mean to give good feedback? And so I think there's a lot of really good models out there. I prefer the provide your observation followed by what followed by what that means to you. So for example, like I noticed that that you showed up work a little bit late today, you showed up work past 9 today, and we were supposed to meet at 8:30, so I was a little concerned that we weren't going to get a chance to have a conversation today, rather than you're always late to work, or you were late to work today, because then it makes it more objective and gives people a chance to have a constructive conversation about it. Also, structural changes. Sometimes the problem is the structure or the people. I worked with a unit that turns out when they got rid of their leader and put a new leader in place, all the problems were solved. It was amazing. That's not always the case, but thinking about that kind of nested version where it's not about the issue, it's not about the relation. It might be about the work team, but it's probably more that structural component larger out because they're the person that is causing a lot of these ripple effects down the chain. And then there might be the opportunity for some diversity, equity, inclusion training that folks sometimes need some support in those areas. And those are things we might be able to provide as Conflict folks. You might partner with someone else, engage someone else to provide those as well. Then there's also a whole other side of things. Could you help plan team retreats, unstructured connection time, coffee hours, bowling, field trips, book clubs, networking events, do some sort of field day, other fun team building activities. I know these aren't typically in our like repertoire of things that we would do as Conflict folks, but if you're working with an organization and they seem like they need connection, you could always be like, hey, let me plan something. Let me help you out. Let me try to find ways. Let's brainstorm how to do these things. And I think often folks aren't very good at finding ways for connection, and you could be a bridge there to helping build connection as a way to help also increase morale. So these are just kind of like a brainstormed list of different things that we can do and ways to also, as Michelle said in the chat, develop relationships. And something that often gets forgotten, happens once. People are like, okay, we all introduce ourselves. Great. I did a training a couple years ago where we're supposed to give very deep and detailed information about our lives to the other participants, sharing very deep experiences. And for the first 3/4 of the first day, the trainers had not done introductions. And you could just see the like palpable, like, I don't know what to do with this amongst folks, right? Because like, hey, if you don't do introductions, how are you expecting to engage in a way like that? And so like, it might be, people might have done introductions 6 months ago, but they can't remember. It was their first day on the job, right? Or whatever it might be. So providing other opportunities to build relationship can be really helpful as well. Okay.
Hey, Tyler, can I say one thing about that? Just they sometimes though, if I was 30 years in corporate life, supervisors or corporate comes up with some offsite, we're going to do team building, and they just continue to behave the way they were behaving, but they do it somewhere else while they're bowling. And nothing ever changes. I saw that over and over again. So as facilitators and conflict coaches, we would want to be cautious of that. You know, they just want to go have fun being the same way they're being, disrespectful or whatever, or vice versa.
Yeah. And I think there's probably ways to hopefully make that a little more productive. Do a half day doing something fun with a half day of more intentional connection time of like, hey, let's talk about how we work together. Let's talk about how we engage. Let's do something with bowling and then do some experiential activity of like, how does it relate to our work? You know, like what you learn today about your coworkers that's going to help you engage differently in the future, right? They kind of like, instead of just making it totally fun, you can also shift it a little bit so that it has some more constructive components that maybe provide a different experience rather than people just treating each other poorly, also at the bowling alley, while also having done it previously at the office. So yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, Lance. What are your thoughts on that? Any way you would have adjusted the way they did that?
Well, I think at some point, like we were saying earlier, we need to create a safe space for people to express themselves It's not just another opportunity for whoever it is to hold court and behave the same way they were.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, I agree. Now, I think exactly what you said is great. Half
Okay,
a day
cool.
of one thing, then some, real hard conversation.
Yeah, and I think often we have those very top-down approaches, providing a shift to the hierarchy where you empower others to make decisions gets back to that self-determination piece. If it's always one way, all the inputs coming downhill, how do you provide an opportunity for folks that are more on the staff employee level, a way to make decisions and like turn the script on them a little bit, because that can really change the way people interact. Okay, let's move on to our next thing so that we can, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple scenarios, and then we're going to talk through a scenario briefly and break people into groups so that you all can talk about what would you do as a conflict person to address this. And then we'll come back to the big group and then we'll do another scenario, etc. So I will read it off, and then we will break people into groups of 3 or 4 if somebody doesn't mind doing that. Okay, thank you. And then you all can discuss, argue, come to an amazing resolution, etc. And then we'll talk about it. So the first one is, it's only feedback. A director at a large organization has been having trouble with an employee that they are supervising temporarily. The employee does not seem to understand that they should be treating the director with respect, regardless of what they think. They have been criticizing the work and intelligence of the director in person and through email. In conversations with the employee, they feel they have the right to give feedback to the supervisor and point out the flaws in their decision-making. Helping people see, quote unquote, helping people see where they can improve and ensuring our business is done right should be our number one goal. The director received a highly critical email on Saturday morning and has talked of quitting due to the disrespect and insubordination. The employee does not see anything wrong with their behavior. Okay, so we're going to break you all up into groups for a few minutes. What do you do about this? Have fun. Oh, I can add the scenario to the chat. Yes, hold on. Let me just pull it up. I'll put it in the chat and we'll broadcast it out to folks so that you have it as well.
Hey, Tyler, I just have a quick question. Did you want me to kind of mix up the breakout rooms or them to go back to the same groups for the next scenario?
I think whatever works. Yeah, let's mix them up a bit, just so
Okay.
different people get different ideas from others.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. And there's a 60-second closeout. So do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome.
Started checking all my messages. I was like, I shouldn't do that.
No worries. I'm multitasking too over here.
Nice.
I didn't have anyone. Serenity couldn't
Oh
get
no.
sound. Yeah, so she left and was going to try on her phone, but we never were able to do the scenario.
Okay, maybe Kristen, next time let's do 4 per room. That way,
Yeah.
make sure.
Yeah, definitely. I will do that. Sorry about that, Kim. I was trying to move folks into other rooms and I was like, if 2 people are in there, I'll leave them, but I'll definitely put you in a larger group next time.
Oh, no worries. Just I don't know why her sound wasn't working, but so.
Hey, is everyone back? Okay. Okay. Great. So, what were people's ideas? What came up for you all as ways to address this?
Well, one of my initial thoughts with this was it could possibly be that the employee has some issues and they don't feel like they're being heard. So maybe instead of starting with, you need to shut your mouth and be respectful, it needs to be, it sounds like you have some concerns here. Let's get to the root of the concerns, and then we can try and figure out an appropriate method of communicating those concerns to your leadership.
So kind of making sure we're showing respect to the individual in terms of how they are experiencing this, feeling this, absolutely, to see if there's like, hey, maybe that can create some change, or there's something that's feeding into all of this. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, what else? We have from Kim, could be the employee is not trained in how to communicate in a professional environment. Yes, this was a younger staff member who I think was their second professional job. So there could have been a gap there, absolutely, in terms of their kind of professional knowledge. What other thoughts do folks have?
So yeah, I had suggested looking at the company hierarchy and policies on how to provide that type of feedback, because the employee might have some valid feedback to give and concerns, but it's coming off as, it's at least from the example, it seems like it's coming off as harsh criticism that the director's not taking well. So if the employee had a chain of command that they could go through, or go through HR before just directing it right to the director.
Cool. So kind of like following, hey, are there other ways this organization solves problems? Let's see if we can access those and utilize those in the answer to their problem. Awesome. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Reframing is very important. So sometimes it takes a conversation with an employee to let them know that trigger words are not something that necessarily needs to be used, and possibly taking a step back before hitting send and reframing the question or reframing the information before firing it off might be ideal.
Yeah, totally. Like, hey, did you want to look at that before you sent it next time? Right? Like, let's think about others involved. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, I'll tell a little bit of a story around this one in a second, just to give kind of like how it went. But that might come up in a minute. Yeah, Linda, what were your thoughts?
Well, I am not a mediator. This is actually what I do for a living, is the conflict coaching and OD, organizational development work with conflict. And so one of the things that has worked for me in organizations in particular is to pull back, get an assessment from each individual ahead of time in a one-on-one, including HR. And also then meet with them together. You can do a circle process, or you can do just a conversation, talking about separating fact from fiction. What is the fact? What is the impact on the other person? And then what is the potential resolution together? And it seems that in organizations, they like that kind of framework because it's logical to them. But I also love open-ended circle processes as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So giving them a space to kind of like peel this back from like, hey, and let's take an approach of like what was said, and then what was the impact of what was said, and then how do we kind of move forward from that. The interesting about these folks, one of the people involved, the employee in this one, I think he probably has some narcissistic tendencies, as he had some very, so working with him, we talked, did pre-meetings with both folks just to understand what's going on, what's the best approach, and talking with him, he's like, well, that I don't care how it affects her. Like, doesn't matter to me. Like feedback is the most important thing, and she needs to know what she did was wrong. She needs to know how to be a better leader, and the only way she's going to get that is through feedback. And okay, well, how do you think she experienced that? Do you think, and so we went down this road of like, kind of like, and he just had no interest in how she experienced it at all, and had no interest in the fact that he might have been causing harm or not causing harm in the future. Which was an interesting thing. And so what we ended up doing, and this, some of these things like you just kind of like stumble on and you're like, oh, that worked, great. This one we ended up taking the email that he sent and we went through it line by line. And I asked him, started with, what was your goal with this email? What did you want to achieve? And he was like, well, I wanted her to change how she was viewing this problem because I was right and she was wrong. I'm like, okay, cool. And do you think this email achieved that goal? And he's like, well, it makes her know that she was wrong. I'm like, okay, did she change her opinion on it? He's like, well, no. Why do you think that is? So we kind of like end up going line by line and asking the question about like, okay, what do you want? But instead of let's talk about harm or impact or anything, because he was not interested in that at all. He was like, but peeling it back to like, okay, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of this? Did this meet your goal? What about this statement? How do you think she took that? Okay, cool. You think it might have been something that you didn't take very well. Okay, so did that help you achieve your goal? How might you have rephrased that, right? And by the end of the conversation, I think we ended up working together for like 3 hours on this. He was like, oh, I can see now how my actions, if I treat people poorly, I won't get necessarily what I want to achieve out of it, right? And you're like, whoa, okay, cool. That's great learning. Not necessarily what I was hoping for of him understanding, hey, harming and impacting others can have negative consequences and we don't want to do that, but that wasn't going to be possible. And that like kind of like switching. And so we ended up doing a conflict coaching route, and he ended up sending her another letter a couple weeks later, apologizing and like talking about what he does appreciate about her, totally unprompted. And I was like, wow, that was really successful. But one of those things was kind of surprised, didn't know where to go. And it doesn't fit into our kind of like often our neat conflict bubble of like, let's give people constructive interactions and they'll get better if they kind of come at it from interesting ways about that. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to our next scenario. So we have time for one more really quick. Okay, let me decide which one I want to do, and then I'll share my screen again. Okay, let's do this one. Where do my Zoom controls go? They always go hidden, don't they? There we go, it is. Okay, share screen, and this one. And here we go. Okay, our next scenario, we are going to do you're the worst. No, you're the worst. And we'll break into groups again, and I will put it in the chat as well. So 2 employees have been embroiled in conflict for a few months. Every issue discussed by the team comes down to 2 employees fighting over why the other person's opinion is wrong. This has been happening in meetings, through emails, and through Teams chats. The unit has been understaffed for a while, and the workload and tension between the 2 employees has affected the work experience of everyone on the team. They were offered mediation, and it was rejected. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so I'll put it in the chat. We'll break into groups and give you all a chance to discuss, and then we'll come back together.
I think everybody's back.
Welcome back, everyone. So anyone want to give us their thoughts on how to approach this?
I think that in this scenario, because they rejected mediation, I think it will be super important to just have a meeting separately and try to figure out their issues and interests and get to the root of it, because it looks like this is just a domino effect of everything else, of the environment for the entire group have been affected, and just everything else trickles down from these 2 people. So just having individual meetings and just trying to figure out the underlying issues and their interests, I think it will be super, kind of doing like caucus, but without mediation.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So kind of like trying to understand what is going on, what is your experience, and what opportunities do we have to shift this? Yeah. What else? What other thoughts do folks have?
I think on that, in our group, we were talking about, yes, getting curious about why both individuals rejected mediation and just understanding their analysis, like the cost benefit analysis, like how much time have you spent, just engaged in this conflict, and asking them, kind of as we were discussing in the last scenario, of can you identify how this is impacting the workplace in general, and also what do you think your job security or relationship with your job moving forward looks like? Do you think this is harming or helping your prospects? And can you think of a way where maybe like a 2-hour structured mediation or some other kind of conflict resolution conversation might save you time and energy moving forward, if it is more just trying to help individuals think about it just from their personal stance.
Awesome. Thanks, Marita. And this one was interesting. They rejected mediation. I tried to do conflict coaching with one of the sides, and it just did not go well. Like, really did not go well. And happens on occasion, just like doesn't work with she was not interested in viewing her behavior and taking responsibility. So I ended up coaching her supervisor to talk to her about it. And the supervisor like laid out, here's how your behavior is affecting the unit, and here's what I expect from you. And she made a 100% 180 around the other side, and is now doing great and working really well. It doesn't have, and it was this just bringing accountability to the conversation really changed her approach to it. And I think sometimes, as we talked about a little earlier, that's something that can be really lacking. But to be accountable to myself, I said 11 o'clock, so I got to let you all go. But I hope you enjoy your rest of your day and the rest of the conference. And thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you, Tyler.
Tyler, thank you so much. And listen, we're going to take a break. Let's come back at 12:15. And we're going to hear from Tanya Settles.
11:15.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. 11:15 to 12:15. Whoever caught that, thank you. 11:15. We're going to come back at 11:15. Tanya Settles, Making Peace Among Peacemakers. See you in 18 minutes. No, 13 minutes. But
go ahead and try again, Lance.
Is everybody, for those of you who are back, I don't know if you can see the screen. Can you see the screen, Kristen?
No, go ahead and try sharing again. Say share screen again.
I'll do it again. Here we go. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
For those, I just wanted to share this. We've got 1 minute, but there we go. 1 minute. I remember where I was in 1998. I was an IT engineer for a small little IT company. 2 years later, I would go to work for IBM. I remember where I was when I saw Google, and I could not figure it out. I couldn't figure out how are they going to use this? What's it going to do? And there's probably nobody here that doesn't use Google every day, or at least Bing or something. And I know, for those who know me on this call, I'm constantly pushing to AI and Chat GPT. This is what it looks like. And so you just type, and it's not an internet search. This thing is smart. It knows immense amount of information. You can have a conversation with it. It's not, what is that word? It's not a sentient thing, but it is a machine with an immense amount of knowledge, and it's constantly learning. And so I just wanted to show you what it looked like, because I'm constantly pushing it. I'm always talking about it. My son is a marine science major at the University of Hawaii. He never has his computer on without having Chat GPT open right next to him, because it does so much work for him. And so anyway, I wanted to show you chat.openai.com. There we go. All right. That's a free tidbit of information at no charge. You can credit Phoenix Strategies with that data. You can remember this day I saw ChatGPT. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker. Tanya, are you? Oh, Tanya.
Hey.
Oh, you're Tanya. Tanya's been in my little breakout group today. So Tanya, it was nice to meet you and nice to introduce you now. Making Peace Among Peacemakers. Tanya Settles is the founder and CEO of Paradigm Public Affairs. Tanya is celebrating 23 years of restorative justice practice this year, and her current work focuses on strengthening relationship between communities and police and facilitating post-conflict peace building. Tanya, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for inviting me to be here today. Like Lance said, I represent Paradigm Public Affairs, and I've been working in conflict resolution for a really long time, but it's actually been primarily in restorative justice. So a lot of the work I do is about resolving conflict between local governments and communities, but particularly around law enforcement interactions. And I'm excited to be here today and part of this conference because I really am looking forward to hearing from you about how we come together as peacemakers to achieve really great things. But I'm gonna scoot back in my chair a little bit. But I have a couple of stories first. One of them is professional, one of them is personal, and both of them ended really badly. So first, the professional one. In 2020, I started work with the city of Portland, Oregon to ease the relationship between the Portland Police Bureau and the diverse communities of Portland that had experienced harm and distrust after the murder of George Floyd. And many of you might recall seeing those nightly reports about violence in Portland in the weeks and the months, and some would argue the years, after George Floyd's murder. And eventually the violence eased and the relationship between PPB and the communities was still harmed, almost to the point of being irreparably damaged. So being the restorative justice person that I am, of course, my approach was to take what I knew about how to bring people together, restore the relationship. And I started to put together this multi-tiered approach that really involved preparing the police officers for resolution, meeting with community members in those communities that were most harmed, and over a period of time, bringing the sides together in what fundamentally amounted to a truth and reconciliation process. And of course, it was a lot more complex than that, but that's not really the story. The story is, last year, I attended a restorative justice conference, and I was really excited to present this approach to conflict resolution and harm reduction in Portland. And I wanted to hear from people and learn from others who take a restorative angle on conflict resolution, what our opportunities were. And I understood that we were really in very uncharted territory. And I wanted to gain that perspective of what other people in my field and profession thought about the approach. And I went in expecting insight and critique, and I thought I'd hear some suggestions, but what I didn't anticipate was absolute positive sheer outrage, some yelling, and a deep disdain for what I was trying to accomplish. And I listened to the feedback, and I took to heart the criticism of others, and then I spent the rest of the conference with my tail tucked between my legs, looking for a dark corner to go and sit and deal with the sting of rejection. And there was an important lesson I learned from that experience, and it was, even among the peacemakers, there's room for disagreement and discord. So the second story is a little bit more personal, and again, a little bit of background. So you all remember the pandemic, right? So in the summer of 2021, after the federal government made PPP loans available to businesses to kind of stop that financial hemorrhage, I got a call from an investigator from the Small Business Administration to confirm my application for a PPP loan for Tanya Settles Farms. And I'd actually made a loan application for our business, but this one was different. I don't have a farm. I told the investigator I had some really spectacular eggplants growing in the garden that I was particularly proud of that year, but not a farm. And they had a lot of personally identifiable information about me from this fraudulent application. It included a social security number and a date of birth and addresses and all of the things that you need to commit fraud. And to the Small Business Administration's credit, they quickly mobilized, they shut down that application. And they later told me that their investigation suggested that the information that they had obtained or that was on that loan was obtained via a swipe of my driver's license or something like that. So I'm a little bit hesitant to swipe anything anymore. And fast forwarding to, and this was something that happened just a few weeks ago. I went to a local liquor store. I was having some friends over. I was purchasing some wine. I went to pay for it, and the clerk asked for an ID. And I told him, well, it's okay with me if you verify my age, though. Admittedly, I have underwear older than the legal drinking age in this state, but don't swipe my driver's license because of privacy concerns. And that opened a barrage of what I perceive to be mansplaining about how nothing is private anyway. My payment card has more information on it. And of course, I responded, probably inappropriately, with, I understand that, well, they told me the law requires them to scan IDs. And I said, no, it doesn't. The law requires you to not sell alcohol to people under the age of 21. And I've already proven I am no longer 21. And he argued and I argued and I got more mansplaining and he got more policy girl is smart and is right anyway. And eventually I paid for my wine. I went home seething and feeling really creepy that I had allowed myself to become so frustrated that I completely and totally lost my cool over something as mundane as a bottle of wine and a retail clerk who was probably just trying to do his job the best way he knew how. And nobody won that argument, but I'd say I'm going to volunteer myself here as the loser because I was annoyed and I felt ridiculous over something so minor that it still bothers me today. And there was a lesson learned there too, that even for people who are peacemakers, our desire to be right and to win can be so overpowering to the point that we are counterproductive. So where does that leave us today? So here we are, we're talking about wellness. And from where I sit, one of the best paths to wellness is overcoming our barriers, getting out of our own way, and finding fellowship among colleagues. And as mediators and negotiators and people who have dedicated their professional existence to resolving conflict, we have some needs. We have a need to fit in. We have a need to fit in with a community of like-minded allies who support us. We support each other, we support our work, and we lift each other up when the path is muddy and it's treacherous, and that happens a lot. And we have a need to feel valued, that sometimes we find value in being right or winning in a negotiation, but sometimes we have a need to feel valued as an empathetic professional. But in the end, the need to be valued for the contributions we make to finding peace for ourselves and for others is significant. And third, as so many people have mentioned here today, we come from different perspectives and skill sets and approaches, but we still have a need for autonomy. And we don't always have a common vision because we have organizations that we operate and manage. But so we need to retain our independence, but at the same time belong to a community. So one of my goals here, I have to admit, is it's a lot self-serving. It's not a little bit self-serving. I really want to understand from your perspective as a community of conflict professionals, how do we come together to support one another? How do we join forces and advance peacemaking when, in a time when finding peace seems so difficult and hard? And so I'm inviting you to join me on this, and I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know what we're going to find out about ourselves, but I'd like to, let's start by taking that first step, and that is in the chat box, if you would take just a minute to tell us a little bit about who you are, just in a word or 5 words about how you identify yourself professionally and in the realm of conflict resolution. Are you a mediator, a negotiator, a restorative facilitator, ADR specialist, lawyer, judge, something else? Who are we? I'll stop for just a minute and talk about that. And while you're responding in the chat, I'm going to see if I can get one of these multiple screens I have in front of me to show a slide deck. Well, I have to say I'm a little bit bummed because when I showed my slide deck, my chat went away. Lance, maybe you or Michelle can help me. What are people saying about who they are and how they fit into this field?
Well, I'll read some of them.
Okay.
Volunteer mediator, restorative justice facilitator, and mediator. Angela White sent that. And the ones I'm going to read out loud are sent to everyone so we can see them. Linda Newell says she's a conflict/restorative coach, consultant, with a trauma-informed approach. I like that. Denise Lord says she's an RJ and CR practitioner. Kathy V says she's a peacemaker, try to be intentional listener and a navigator. Mary is an educator, an instigator, and a relentless peacemaker. I like that. Is that enough?
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you, everybody. And I did finally figure out how to share this.
Okay, good.
I am, or how to see it rather. I am loving what I'm seeing here. And maybe some of you were at that conference, my restorative justice practitioners, colleagues. Maybe you were at that conference where I spent most of my time crying. Anyway, it was a good learning experience for a lot of reasons. So let me move through some of these slides here and get us caught up to where we're at. I've already shared a little bit with you about where I come from, and I spend a lot of my time bridging gaps between communities and governments, particularly while there are where there's conflict between, and there's so much anymore. There's far too many examples than we can actually discuss. But what I really want to talk about is how do we build a community? How do we restore ourselves and come together? And there are some elements that there's a lot of different approaches, but there are some elements that seem to tie us. So one of them is and they're important enough that I actually call them pillars. One is mutual understanding. The idea that we don't always agree, but we know what the ground rules are and we know where the boundaries lie. Pillar number 2 is trust and psychological safety. And I don't mean mental health. I mean psychological safety in a way that people can be who they need to be, who they want to be. They can say what's on their mind, and they do it without fear of humiliation or retribution. Those two things, trust and psychological safety, are deeply, deeply related, but we need both to support the structure of a community. And then the third pillar is how do we communicate among ourselves, interpret those nonverbal cues, and think about what's going on in our brains behind the scenes. So what I'd like to ask for is if maybe we could go into breakout sessions. And in this breakout session, our goal is to understand how do we define our community, which is spelled wrong on the screen. Sorry about the typo. When you get into your breakout room, let's think about that macro level question and explore how we conceptualize what's important to us as a team, as a collective. And I'm going to ask for someone to kind of jot down notes and report back to the group when we come together. So we'll be in this great breakout session for just about maybe 7-8 minutes. And in your time there, think about this one great big question. How do we define our community? How broad is conflict resolution or conflict management, or however, conflict professionals in Colorado? And are we inclusive of all types of processes and approaches? And do our personal preferences get in the way or result in the exclusion of other people? So as we say in the West, sometimes we have a burr under our saddle. I have one, I'll own it. The one that I have is about court mandated mediation. I know a lot of you probably make a living doing court mandated mediation attempts. And, you know, I'll own it. But I think too that there's a lot I can learn about that process. And without a doubt, there's tools and techniques that I feel like I can learn from ADR practices that are different from my own or court ordered. So even though I disagree from a philosophical level, I have to say they're in. So I'll start the conversation there. And if someone could help me move people into breakout sessions, we'll be there for about 10 minutes. Again, to re-emphasize, how do we define our community is the big question we're trying to answer. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So while you were in your chat rooms, I was reading the responses that people offered about how do you define yourself? And here's one of the things that one of the common threads I'm seeing right now is that for so many of us, we are much, much more than what we do for a living. We are much, much more. And this is exciting to me. So what did you find in your chats? Were you able to come to any sort of consensus about who we are or what we do and who's in and who's out? Anybody want to volunteer? If you'd like, you can write it in the chat or take yourself off mute and let's talk about it.
In our group, it seemed like there was a definite difference between RJ practitioners and mediators.
Okay.
And kind of the difference between the two is, and this is, you know, our perspective was that RJ has a more social activism and work and band together type of, you know, atmosphere or mindset, I should say, where mediators are solo practitioners. And we have our specialty areas, and we're very, you know, siloed, I guess, in our practices.
Interesting. So, Michelle, in that conversation, did you feel like, or did you have the sense, or the people that were in your group, did you have the sense that there's room for everyone, or we need to be more focused, maybe have subgroups of the greater community?
I think we were we had just gotten to the tip of what I just explained. We hadn't really gotten to go any deeper than that, but that was just kind of like the overall consensus of what our conversation was about.
Well, thank you. Thanks. How about another group? What did you find?
I think Linda has her hand raised.
Oh.
Well, I just wanted to offer that I took notes for our group, but if I wasn't the only one, somebody else can speak to it.
And which group, were you in the same group as Michelle or a different group?
Different group.
Oh, well, tell me what you found, what you hear.
Okay. Okay. I am taking up too much space. So our group talked about the diversities of practices as well as diversities of people. We talked about the RJ and conflict practitioners. We talked about the need for training, that we're predominantly white cishet women, and also because of so many volunteer facilitations that probably predominantly higher economic level of practitioners, and that we have a need for greater diversity of all kinds in our conflict practitioner community. And then we talked about the need for training, not just diversity of identities, but the equity consciousness that is not prevalent in our community, that we really need more training for in of our practice. From a trauma-informed perspective, for instance, Marita was talking about the need for domestic violence training if you're working in the child welfare realm, trauma-informed perspective, historical generational trauma, that type of thing, when you're dealing with various diversities and underrepresented, marginalized communities. So that came up. And then we talked about if you're working in like Diane was mentioning, she works for the city of Boulder. And if you're working for a governmental entity rather than a private practitioner, then you're more restrictive and more prescriptive in what you can and cannot do. I think I got most everything.
So sometimes that policy structure around government is a barrier in and of itself to being inclusive and doing the work we really want to do.
Yes, exactly. Like you had mentioned, the mandated mediations, there are pros and cons and all kinds of thoughts around that. And it can create then, various levels of access to justice.
It does. I would agree with you. In my experience, I would agree with you on that. Thanks. That was a lot of information. I appreciate it. How about maybe one more group, two more groups? Anybody? Okay, don't worry. We're going to come back to another breakout session, so you're going to get your chance. So one of the things I'm excited to hear these responses. Thank you. Like I said, it was completely self-serving. I really just wanted to know who are we? And thanks for sharing your ideas and your thoughts about that, because it helped me understand what our community is quite a bit. So I'd love to talk a little bit. Well, I'm going to get rid of these. I've got a window here that I don't need to have. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what is trust and safety. Trust is really about having a relationship between people where we understand what we have a shared understanding of what's valid, what's truth, what's reliable. And so when we say that someone is, or something, or an entity is untrustworthy, typically we're referring to this idea that we don't know what to expect in return from another person. And psychological safety is related to trust because when we work or function in psychologically safe environments, it means that we have this shared belief. So there's that trust element that it's okay to take risks, that we can express ideas, concerns, we can speak candidly, we can make mistakes, and we can do it without fear of retaliation or humiliation, either in formal organizations like corporations and employees, or in informal organizations like the one that we have here. And when people don't have trust, and psychological safety working in tandem with one another, those two things are going hand in hand. We have this tendency to stifle innovation, and people feel disrespected, they feel harmed. And the response to that is folks will shut down to the point where we never actually get around to problem solving or creating a sense of community at all. So let's do another breakout session. I promised you there was going to be another one, and dive into trust and psychological safety just a little bit more. In this next breakout session, whoops, went ahead of myself. In this next breakout session, excuse me. Oh, you know what? I forgot to ask. Do you have the resource guide, the revised one? Did we put that in the chat? Michelle, maybe?
Yes, it's I put it in the chat at the beginning, and I can put it back in there if you'd like.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks. I just completely forgot about it. I got so excited. I thought, yeah. Okay. So in this breakout session, you'll have there's a little bit of guidance that goes along, that's in the resource guide if you need to go back to your notes. But let's talk about trust and psychological safety a little bit more. When you get into these breakout sessions, choose one of the 3 questions that you see in front of you, and that's on the screen in front of you now. And you don't have to take on all 3. Same as last time, pick somebody to take notes, jot down ideas, or at least someone who can, who's willing to volunteer to share with the larger group. So the 3 questions, and again, choose just one of them, are: does our lack of understanding contribute to a lack of trust among us as a community? What do we need? If trust has been eroded, or is falling apart, what do we need to rebuild that trust? Do we need more resources? Do we need more events like this one? Do we need other opportunities? Do we need cross collaboration, excuse me, or training? And then, oh, thanks, Michelle. And then the third, are we psychologically safe? Or is this a psychologically safe place for us to be here? So with that, let's go into breakout sessions again for let's do just like maybe 5 minutes. Pick one of those questions, and I'll see you back on this side.
Tanya, would you like the same breakout sessions, or do you want me to randomize them again?
Yeah, randomize them.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you back in just a few minutes. on. And when we understand about what's going on in the background of our brains, we actually have an opportunity to understand the signals around us a little bit more effectively. So we're going to skip over this. Yeah, sorry, that was a weird image. I'm going to stop screen sharing, I hope. There we go. So I can come back and actually talk with everybody without having a screen in front of us. That'd be nice. Now, my intent wasn't to do an obligatory plug for Disney Pixar. And if you're curious, there is a new version, a sequel to Inside Out coming out next year in 2024. But when we have that chance to think just for a minute about someone else's background, it gives us this opportunity to practice empathy and patience. And those are actually pretty good skills for conflict resolution. And I'm human. I try. I'm not always successful in slowing down my processing and keeping my hot-headed self from reacting really harshly to frustrating situations. What I've learned to do, and here's my tip, is to here's my trigger to stop talking for just a minute, stop reacting to what's in front of me, and I think, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, and they don't know. And when I go back to one of the examples that we talked about, or I presented that ended badly, had I taken advantage of that moment to just stop and think, I don't know, and they don't know, things could have actually ended differently, probably in both scenarios. And with the example of the retail clerk, if I had stopped for just a second to think, I don't know, I might have run a scenario through my head that said something like, I don't know that this person sold a six-pack to a minor and got a ticket from a local law enforcement officer, and his source of income is laying in the balance of not doing it again. And had I thought through the scenario of they don't know, I would have thought, they don't know that I'm on a tight schedule, that I have about 4 minutes to make this purchase before my next meeting. And I had absolutely no way of knowing that I narrowly escaped being the victim of fraud that could have cost my business millions of dollars. So part of moving forward, I think, as a community is being intentionally empathetic as we navigate who are we? Who are we as a community? Can we trust one another? Can we come together more often than once a year through this great opportunity we have through this conference? And think about, I don't know and they don't know. Stop, think, and be the better listener so that we all get those benefits of community. And we've got a couple of minutes left. I'd love to know, what are your thoughts? Can we come together more frequently? Do we want to come together more frequently? Do you feel like we're people that we can reach out to when I say, hey, I've got this thing coming up and I don't quite know what to do with it, but maybe you can help. Can we be that community? Go ahead, jump in. Sorry.
I'd like to respond. I do think that we can. I think that that can certainly be, yes, I know everybody gets busy but I'll tell you, just like I told my group, I really wanted to be a part of this conference just to kind of get to know more of you. I'm a full-time professor, but I'd like to get into mediation work, and I'm not really sure how to, you know what I mean? I've done it before, but never been able to do it as a living anyway. But getting together is being able to connect so I can learn from you guys. Absolutely. I would be so grateful.
Give me a call. I started this as a full-time professor. Give me a call. Let's have that conversation here. I'm gonna send y'all an email address and a phone number. So if I can help you, shoot, reach out. And while I'm doing that, any other thoughts?
I'll pipe in. And this is what I was about to say at lunch, so I'm going to be brief, but I think that community in the mediation space is so important because our practice is inherently very solitary, unless you have the good fortune of co-mediating at some point, but probably usually not. And now that we're in this world of Zoom, it's even more imperative that we have community and the ability to access people who understand the nuances of that and to talk about our experiences, what's challenging. I also just think of, I had the good fortune of mediating when we were in person for a while, and just the camaraderie that you had after a good or a bad mediation was emotionally really important. And I really miss that. And I love that that you've posed this question, Tanya, because I think it's something that should be valued more for our mental well-being, but also as a profession. And I would love to figure out how we can come together more and have more meaningful community. And what does that look like now that we're in this world of Zoom that's wonderful, helps us proliferate the mediation process, but arguably increasingly lonely. And so I love these types of communities, and I too will reach out to you to talk about how maybe we can make that more accessible to our mediators in Colorado.
I would love that conversation. Please do. Pardon me. Please do reach out. And everyone, I want to say thank you again. Thanks for, yeah, there's an idea. Come join the conflict mediation month, folks. That's a good idea. Thank you, Suzanne. I want to say thank you to everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for letting me be part of your community. And thanks for sharing your thoughts and ideas with me. I appreciate it very, very deeply. And I'm looking forward to hearing from so many of you.
Tanya, thank you so much. Virtual clap and your presentation was excellent. A lot of food for thought there and great conversation. Now listen, don't leave yet. We're going to take a lunch break now, but don't leave. Get your lunch and come back, because we're going to have a working lunch session. There are going to be 5 different rooms. One of the rooms is a room set up for Morgan Duffy Tregenza with the MAC. She's going to answer all your questions. You really want to get connected. I just went through that process. I got my 40-hour training. I got my 100 hours of mediation. I turned it all in. And so you really want to get an understanding of what it takes and how to do it. And then we're going to have 4 other rooms that are going to have questions, just a networking group and some questions to discuss how to quickly build rapport with strangers, which questions help unlock people who are stuck, when is it time to throw out the script entirely, and then the final question is, how do you recover from listener's drain? These are going to be great sessions to just have conversation with one another. Get your lunch, come back, and you'll get put in a room.
Just to clarify, Lance,
yes,
these are breakout rooms that you can self-select into and then pop out in and go to another one. So you can pop around, you don't have to choose just one. And then after that, we'll have a link to go to our last session that will not be on this Zoom link, but it'll be in the chat. So grab your lunches and we'll see you in the breakout rooms.
Kristen, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Lance or Michelle, would you say when we should be back for the start?
It looks like 1:15, but keep a note that that's a different link. You're going to leave this Zoom and go to another Zoom link that's connected with the Estes Valley Library. So, and that starts at 1:15.
And then for the lunch breakout rooms, how many minutes do we have to get our lunch?
Oh, I don't know. She's probably opening up those now. I mean,
yeah, they're open now. So
yeah, they're open.
You can
now,
join it right now, or you can go grab your lunch, come back. They will be open from now until 1 p.m. When we kind of reconvene, we'll give you some more information and we'll give you that link for the 1:15 start.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Lance.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, just anyone who has this question. So if you are looking to join the breakout groups, you can go to the bottom. Sometimes there will be an icon right there, breakout groups. Sometimes you'll have to click on the more to find the breakout room button there, and then you can just say join, and then that will pop you into that one. And then when you're done, you can say leave, go back to main room, and then you can do the same process to join another one.
Thanks, Kristen. Is that how we'll get the second link too?
No, the second link we'll put in the main chat, and that one I can put in right now, actually, so you all have it. Let me do that. I'll put it in right now so you have it, and then know that we'll post it again when we all come back at 1.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep. Lance, you're back on the big screen. And you're muted.
Hey, everybody, we're back. And I can't see everybody, and I'm going to get the gallery view. There we go. Everybody, we're back. And right now we're going to have Michelle, right? Michelle, you're going to say a few words about Phoenix Strategies, but it's really more than that, isn't it?
So yes, I just wanted to share a few words. I am so grateful for everyone that is attending this conference. I truly love to see everyone's faces out there. Monica and now I have been doing this conference for 18 years. And if you would read this quotation, I think this points directly to our community today. With all the conflict that continually develops in this world, we have the key to not only help people find their way out of conflict, but to engage in conflict in a way that doesn't have to end with broken families, broken friendships, broken communities, or worse, war and atrocity. Keep the spirit of this conference alive and create a ripple effect in the world by joining a group such as Conflict Resolution Month, the MAC, the Mediation Room on Facebook, or you can join us at My Little Book Club on Thursdays for lunch. I wish you all the experience of wellness through this journey of creating peace. Thank you again for attending the conference, and we are going to put the link, if it's not already in the chat, to the next presentation. Again, we're partnering with, I've got to find it.
We're partnering with the Estes Park Library, right?
Oh, yes. And Kristen just put it in there. So if you don't have it, I think you can either click on it or you can copy it and put it into a new tab, but you need to leave this meeting and go to the next meeting.
Yep. So just I'll pop in here really quick. Just saying that it is the author talk with Jimena Bengochea. She's the author of Listen Like You Mean It, which is the book that we selected this year for Conflict Resolution Month in Colorado. And we are partnering with Phoenix Strategies, Estes Valley Libraries, and Estes Valley Restorative Justice Partnership to bring this speaker here to a larger group. So it will be a webinar, so it'll be a little bit different than a Zoom meeting. And as Michelle said, you do need to click the link. It will force you to leave. So if you want to copy and paste it, just have it somewhere so that, or I will stay in this room for a little while. You can always come back and get the link here if it doesn't work. When I tried it just a few minutes ago, it did not ask for a passcode, but the instructions did have that passcode in there. So just make sure that you've got that. And yeah, I'll stick around if anyone has any issues with that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for keeping us organized. Thank you, Michelle, for putting this on. We thank our speakers, and we'll see you in the other room.